Okay, we have a quorum of the board, so we will convene our meeting this morning. I'd like to welcome everyone to our virtual meeting today. Thank you to everyone for making the switch to from virtual or to in-person to virtual on such short notice. As a reminder, please mute your devices when not speaking as a courtesy to others. To begin our meeting today, I'd like to ask Curator Holbrook to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, and liberty and justice for all.
All right. Thank you, Curator Holbrook. This is a good addition to the meeting. Appreciate you doing that. Okay, so we'll start off with the chair's report. Do we have some slides to load for that? Okay. So good morning, and thank you all for joining us for today's board meeting. Thank you to President Choi and the Mizzou team for hosting, and for the board office for helping us quickly pivot to this virtual meeting. I wish we could be on campus with everyone to visit with faculty, staff, and students in Columbia. However, I do hope everyone is staying safe and warm during this winter storm. For my board chair reports this year, I look forward to continuing to share the important work done by our researchers on our university campuses. Additionally, I'm going to share the student connections and mentorship opportunities supported by all of these projects. But first, I want to share with you the latest group of Curators Distinguished Professors from Mizzou. These appointments signify outstanding scholars with an established reputation for research and teaching. I'm pleased to recognize 9 individuals from Mizzou this morning. Our first professor is Dr. Dongxing Duan, medical researcher in molecular biology and immunology and neurology in the School of Medicine. He earned his PhD from the University of Pennsylvania in 1997. Since his arrival at MU in 2002, Dr. Duan has secured more than $22 million in research funding, mostly from the National Institutes of Health. His major research interest is understanding and treating Duchenne muscular dystrophy. Next is Dr. I-Jin Lee, a professor in the Department of Physics and Astronomy who came to MU in 2004. He earned his PhD in astrophysics from Leiden University in the Netherlands in 1998. Dr. Lee's research includes theoretical studies of the interstellar medium, the formation and evolution of stars and planetary systems, as well as comets, infrared galaxies, and active galactic nuclei. Next is Dr. Chris Lorson, Director of the Spinal Cord Injury, Disease, and Repair Program, Associate Dean for Research and Graduate Studies in the College of Veterinary Medicine, and the Associate Vice Chancellor for Research. He earned his PhD in 1997 from the University of Missouri. Dr. Lorson's research interests include molecular basis of spinal muscular atrophy, RNA processing, and gene therapy. Next is Dr. David Pentel, the Dr. R. Philip and Idane Acuff Endowed Chair in Medical Research in the School of Medicine. He earned his PhD from the University of Illinois in 1979. Dr. Pentel studies parvovirus molecular genetics and parvovirus host cell interaction. In recognition of his contributions to understanding the life cycle of parvoviruses, in 2015, Dr. Pentel was named a fellow of the prestigious American Association for the Advancement of Science and elected fellow of the American Academy of Microbiology. Next, we have Dr. Wendy Rinke, a professor and associate vice chancellor for research in the Department of Education, School and Counseling Psychology in the College of Education and Human Development. She's also the co-director of the Missouri Prevention Center. Dr. Ranke's expertise is in prevention and treatment of childhood emotional and behavioral disorders. She earned her PhD in school psychology from the University of Oregon in 2005. Next is Marjorie Skubik, a professor in the Electrical Engineering and Computer Engineering Department at MU with a joint appointment in computer science. She's also the director of the Center for Elder Care and Rehabilitation Technology. Dr. Skubik specializes in elder care technology, human-robot interaction, and special reasoning interfaces. She received her PhD in computer science from Texas A&M University in 1997. Next is Dr. Bethany Stone, a 2011 William T. Kemper Fellow for Excellence in Teaching and a 2017 Summer Institutes on Scientific Teaching Fellow from the Yale University Center for Teaching and Learning. She earned her PhD from the University of Missouri in 2001. Dr. Stone teaches and researches learning and introductory level undergraduate science courses. She looks for ways to help undergraduate students realize, one, that they can do science, and two, biology is both interesting and vital for them to understand. Next is Dr. Tony Sun, a fellow in the Institute of Mathematical Statistics, elected member of the International Statistical Institute, and a fellow of the American Statistical Association. He earned his PhD from the University of Waterloo in 1952. Dr. Sun's research interests include biostatistics, design and analysis of clinical trials, longitudinal data analysis, chemometrics and AIDS and cancer research. And last but not least, we have Dr. Dong Xu, a bioinformatics endowed professor in the Department of Electrical Engineering and Computer Science. He received his PhD from the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign in 1995. His research is in computational biology and bioinformatics. Dr. Xu was elected to the rank of American Association for the Advancement of Science Fellow in 2015 and American Institute for Medical and Biological Engineering Fellow in 2020. Congratulations to this round of Curators Distinguished Professors. Your contributions to Mizzou, the UM system, and beyond is remarkable, and we thank you for your dedication. As we all know, student success is critical to the success of our institutions. We'll be talking about that more today. I'm proud to share projects from all four universities that shine a light on the impressive research conducted by our faculty that also provide hands-on learning opportunities for the students that they mentor. Okay, starting with Mizzou, I want to recognize Dr. Michael Petrus. Dr. Petrus is a professor and researcher in the MU School of Medicine, departments of ophthalmology and biochemistry. His research, housed in the Bond Life Science Center, focuses on how minerals are accumulated within the body at the right locations and in the right concentrations, specifically how copper functions in Alzheimer's disease, tumor growth, and microbial killing by the immune system. His work was recently awarded nearly $4.5 million in grants from both the National Cancer Institute and the National Institute of Diabetes and Digestive and Kidney Diseases to study copper's role in cancer therapy and a potential treatment for Wilson's disease. Dr. Petrus's work affords him the opportunity to work closely with the following remarkable students. Kimari Azubuogu is currently a second-year biochemistry PhD student who grew up in Nigeria and immigrated to California as a teenager. He completed his GED and then successfully completed an undergraduate degree at UCLA. This student is exploring novel therapeutic approaches to cancer using gene editing strategies to disrupt a copper transporter called ATP7A in mice and in tumor cells. Dylan Calhoun is currently an undergraduate senior in biology. His project will identify functional domains of the ATP7A copper transporter to help improve the efficacy of anti-cancer compounds. Vineet Shambug has completed a PhD in biochemistry in Dr. Petrus's laboratory. His work was the foundation of the grant of from the National Cancer Institute. And Nikita Gudakar, who completed a PhD in genetics with Dr. Petrus. Her studies were the foundation of the grant from NIDDK, and her results have uncovered novel connections between copper and oxygen metabolism that have implications for treating cancer and other disorders, such as Wilson's disease. Okay, from UMKC, I'd like to recognize Dr. John Kevern, a professor of civil engineering and chair of the Department of Civil and Mechanical Engineering at UMKC. Dr. Kevern is leading the Kansas City Urban Renewal Engineering Fellows. The project's goal is to increase the graduation rate and graduation GPA of transfer students by providing a scholarship that allows them to spend more time on campus instead of working low-wage hourly jobs. In turn, students are paired with a faculty member to perform undergraduate research related to anything which helps urban infrastructure. This project is funded by the National Science Foundation, STEM Track 2 Design and Development from 2020 to 2024. Students tied closely to Dr. Kevern's work include civil engineering undergraduate students Jennifer Arms, Dan Karen, Jade O'Connell, and Emma Youngs. From Missouri S&T, I want to share about Dr. Frank Hahn, Assistant Professor of Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering. Dr. Hahn's research focuses on gas and plasma modeling, space propulsion, and high-performance computing. Currently, Dr. Hahn is working on a project funded by the Young Investigator Award from the Air Force Office of Scientific Research that supports his research on electro spray propulsion systems. He gets the honor of working with Shelby Schreckenberg. Pictured with him, are we on that slide?
No.
Okay. All right, thank you. Pictured with him, Shelby is a senior double majoring in aerospace engineering and mechanical engineering at Missouri S&T. She has served as the president of S&T's chapter of Society of Women Engineers and interned at the NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, California. She is interested in space launch missions, space exploration, and designing spacecraft. Okay, and from UMSL, we have Dr. Bruce Hamper, Associate Teaching Professor of Chemistry at UMSL. Dr. Hamper's current project is funded by Pfizer for the development and evaluation of novel continuous flow synthetic methods for preparation of vaccine conjugates. Dr. Hamper also worked to develop a new course for non-science majors, Chem 1021, beer brewing, chemical and biochemical principles. As an extension of this course, a project was initiated to research hops-derived bitter agents in beer, which now graduate student Hunter Campbell was able to assist with. These examples of research and student mentorship showcase the depth and breadth and really the diversity of work represented by our universities. Our research mission is critical to what we achieve as a university system and a strong example of how we best serve the citizens of Missouri. But tying it in with the success of our students really illustrates the difference we are making each and every day. I look forward to sharing more examples throughout the year as your board chair. With that, I'll conclude my report so we can jump into the business of the meeting. Okay, we will now move on to the president's report. So President Choi, I turn it over to you for your report.
Thank you, Chair Chapman. Just watching your presentation and learning about the exciting work that's happening really makes me proud to be part of this university. So thank you very much for sharing. Let's begin with my slides. I want to begin by thanking all of our students, faculty, and staff for providing the rich experience of in-person learning. We know that it has been a difficult past 2 years with the pandemic and many other issues that our students, faculty, and staff have faced, but I really do appreciate the resilience. And as you can see from the random shots that we took throughout the term, students are enjoying what they do in the classroom, in the laboratories, and our faculty and staff are providing that rich experience. Next slide, please. But it's more than just in-person learning. Behind the scenes and in direct interaction with our students, staff from all over the 4 university campuses, the MU Healthcare as well as Extension, are contributing in so many ways. I want to recognize them. First and foremost, the frontline healthcare workers that have kept our community safe, despite their own challenges of fatigue from the long hours, but we really do greatly appreciate all of their support. But also people that help serve food and clean our buildings. Their diligence is greatly appreciated. and the advisors who work with students day in and day out to ensure that they have the necessary coursework and the professional advice to advance their careers. Next slide. Next slide. I want to begin by talking about student success as part of our key focus at the four universities, and that is providing opportunities, access and opportunity, but also ensuring that we have completion. What you see is a three-year table of 3 years of application data for first-time college students, as well as the acceptances, students that actually pay their deposits intending to study at one of our four universities. The year-over-year growth between 21 to 22 are designated by either a green font or red font, depending on if the numbers went up or down. There's strong performance throughout the UM system. And I know that UMKC and S&T, when it comes to freshman acceptances, are working very hard to convert the yield that they have. Next slide. Next slide. Nope, slide before. On the transfer application, also we're seeing strong growth across the UM system. And the goal here also is to convert those students so that they matriculate. And the transfer students that attend our universities do well when it comes to graduating in a timely fashion and do contribute much to our academic and social environment at the universities. Next slide. All four universities have seen very strong growth in international and graduate students led by international applications, but also domestic students that want to advance their careers through either the master's degree, professional certificate, or the doctorate. And once again, we're seeing this strong growth across all four universities, which is a good sign for our graduate programs. Next slide. When it comes to our online programs, there's been a strong push for the past 3 to 4 years in improving our online offerings. And we are seeing the outcomes as measured by US News and World Report for top programs. So by campuses, we've outlined those that have fared in the top 50 of program rankings. And those that you see in red, like the number 4 Best Education Masters and number 17 Best Bachelors for Veterans, are specifically designed for veterans. And is recognized that our programs, whether it's being offered at Mizzou or Missouri S&T, are ranked very highly. And the other programs at UMKC and UMSO also share in that they share courses together across UMKC, UMSO, and Mizzou, so that it brings that systemness and brings more efficient use of our resources for the benefit of our students. Next slide. Under the leadership of Matt Gunkel, working very closely with leaders at all 4 campuses, we're also seeing very significant increases in students that are purely online degree-seeking students. So compared to 2019, 2020, 2021, this spring semester, we have seen very significant increases in student headcount. 39% increase this point in time compared to 2019. And that is a measurable increase that signifies the quality of our program and therefore the interest from students across the country. Next slide. When we convert those students that take online courses purely for degree-seeking online students and the number of credit hours that the students take, the growth is even more dramatic. Compared to 2019, this point in time, we are up 60% when it comes to student credit hours that are generated for purely online degree-seeking students. So we expect that this growth will also have significant impact on our revenues through online so that we can provide more opportunities to students in Missouri and beyond to complete their degrees, especially working adults. Next slide. The next few slides, we're going to talk about research as measured by the most important metric when it comes to research performance at research universities. Next slide. The federal R&D expenditures are shown for the first 7 months of the fiscal year. And I'll give you a chance to just browse through the graphs from the 4 universities and the system. With the exception of UMSL, and we are working very closely with Chancellor Sobolik, and she's committed to increasing research at the university at the federal level, state, and industry support. The 3 universities have seen year-over-year growth. And we need to continue this growth so that we become stronger research universities. And across the system, from 2016 through 2022, the expenditures, the federal expenditures increased from 84 million to $127 million. Next slide. The federal R&D awards is a leading indicator that gives us guidance on how our expenditures will perform in the coming years. And as you can see from here, also significant growth for the system from the period between 2016 through 2022. Next slide. The most important leading indicator is comes in the form of proposals. We have to write the proposal that will be evaluated, that can eventually be awarded for us to be able to expend the resources to pursue and perform our research R&D. And in this category, the significant increase from 2016 to 2022 has been so important because it demonstrates that our faculty members are contributing to this very important endeavor that defines a public research university. Next slide. The prior slide showed the value of the federal R&D proposals. This shows the total numbers of proposals that have been written in the first 7 months for all 4 universities, as well as the system. I'll give you a chance to browse the data. Next slide. While federal R&D research is very important, we are a comprehensive university that supports research that is provided with support from the state government, industry, foundations, and donors. And so combining all of these values, we can see the total R&D expenditures for the first 7 months. And once again, from 2016 to 2022, significant year-over-year growth to now where our total R&D expenditures is at $157 million. So this is a good sign for the performance of our universities. But knowing the 3 other chancellors, I know that they have aspirations to grow this even more significantly in the coming years. And the plans that they have are truly, truly exciting. Next slide. Just a few examples of research programs that really do distinguish our universities. At Mizzou, Professor Derek Anderson, who was recruited several years ago from Mississippi State, and his colleagues are working on advanced artificial intelligence to evaluate the billions upon billions of permutations that are possible in bringing together different molecules so that you can have functional materials for specific purposes. And so this takes away the trial and error approach of designing materials for particular applications, whether it be for hypersonics or for biomedical applications. Next slide. And at UMKC and both at UMSL, and I'm going to talk about UMSL a little bit later, there is a deep commitment to research that makes an impact to the community. And as part of this study, PI Crom and their colleagues are developing a national peer recovery center of excellence that helps those that are in need of support services. But as part of this, not only will they gather data to learn the best practices, but the efficacy of those practices in helping those that are in need of substance abuse and so forth. Next slide. At UMSO, PI Taub and her colleagues are working on mental health support. As many of you know, UMSO is home to the state of Missouri Institute of Mental Health, and PI Taub is part of that group. And as part of this organization, they're working on effective ways of treating those patients from the opioid epidemic and to provide better training for first responders, as well as self-awareness and self-diagnosis that can help those that are in need. Next. Last but not least is the important work being conducted by Professor O'Malley and his colleagues. And this is a very large grant, but compared to the overall scope of their activities on high temperature, high strength steel manufacturing, it's a very important component. And as part of this, they're using real-time analysis to have real-time control feedback to produce the types of steel that are needed, not only for manufacturing, construction, but also for warfare. Next slide. The Board of Curators has always been interested in support of our university through philanthropy. And during the past several years, overall, our universities have done really well, significantly because of the support from Fred and June Kummer, as you can see from that outsized growth in 2021 at Missouri S&T. At Mizzou and UMKC and UMSO, we are all contributing in a way that supports our academic mission. So there's been a focus on advancement to be aligned to the strategic priorities at the four universities. And you'll hear more about capital campaigns that will be in progress and those that are in development so that we can further contribute to the important work that we do at our four universities for student success, research, and meaningful engagement. Next slide, please. In terms of our legislative priorities, we really want to thank the governor and members of the state houses for their strong support of public education in our state. Last year, we had a banner year in terms of support from the state for both our core appropriations and one-time construction projects. This year, as part of the governor's budget, the governor has proposed a 5.4% increase in our core appropriation, which is one of the highest in recent memory. In addition to that, the four universities have been provided with budget support for $246 million for key capital projects. But as we determine our overall strategy for the budget, there are a few things that give us some concern, which is a significant rise in CPI. And December CPI was at 7%. And we're also finding difficulty in hiring and retaining the best faculty and staff to support our research and academic mission. And the concern that we've had for many years about competitive compensation for faculty and staff has been exacerbated by the rise in costs. And so these are all items that I'll be discussing with the board and the senior leaders throughout the four universities, and we'll come up with a budget recommendation that we can discuss in later board meetings. So last but not least, let's move on to the next slide. I know that the board has a special recognition for Steve Owens, the general counsel at the university. On behalf of the UM system, we want to thank Steve for his 14 years of service. There are not many general counsels that have served as interim president and interim chancellor, but Steve is one of those individuals that gave his very best to the university and contributed in so many ways to our success. Next slide. We also have a transition from Kathy Schmidt-Phelps, who served for 15 years at MU and the UM system. And the recent rise in US News and World Report ranking is due to her and the work of her team to make sure that we are presenting our data in the most accurate way possible. But beyond that, her work on MyVita, as well as academic analytics, have tremendously improved our ability to support faculty excellence. And she'll be leaving after 15 years to take on the role of vice president at academic analytics. So we're going to have a strong partner to use that platform to help support faculty performance in R&D. So we want to thank Kathy as well. So Chair Chapman, that concludes my my presentation, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you or the board may have.
Well, Moon, thank you so much for highlighting that the wonderful work of our faculty, driving research, and thank you for your efforts in leading that effort. So thank you. Any questions for President Choi on his report?
I've got a question,
Yes.
Chair Chapman. President Choi, obviously this board and your team, we've all focused very much on getting more dollars into research. And I know, for example, if you want more grants, one of the first things you have to do is ask for more grants. And if you want more research, you got to plow more money into research. It seems like we're doing all those things. How do we, I guess, how do we understand or improve the output? How do we guarantee that we're getting the optimal research back to us? Obviously, everything looks just tremendous today, but I guess that's my question.
So Curator Lehman, in terms of measuring the output, the effectiveness of the output can be rather straightforward. We measure the proposal output, and with the increase in funding support at NIH, NSF, Department of Defense, and other federal agencies, those are the areas that we need to focus on. And our deans, the vice chancellor for research, as well as our provosts are actively working with faculty groups to provide support, catalyst support for those projects to be matured so that they can be submitted as proposals. So we're going to be using analytics, research analytics, to match funding opportunities with faculty expertise. And also, we're going to be making investments by hiring faculty members that bring with them significant amount of research from their current institution. So it's a two-pronged approach.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Moon, could you highlight or talk about just for a minute the effect that the research dollars have on your operational budgets? From my understanding is that the research grants only pay for about 80 to 90% of the research it takes. The other 10 to 20% has to be absorbed by the university. Am I correct in that? And then how's that, as we get more research dollars, how do we fund the balance of it?
So you ask a very good question about the cost of doing research, and research does cost money. In terms of the support from the federal government, for example, our largest funder of research, the indirect cost that is provided doesn't cover all of the indirect costs associated with research. But there are other values that are truly important for a university. But because we are a research university, we are able to attract the very best faculty members who want to come to our universities to perform research, teach our students, and engage in meaningful research. And that's why universities like Virginia, Michigan, Princeton focus so heavily on research to attract the faculty, then the quality of the faculty then attract students to the university. And the quality of research also brings in significant support through philanthropy, because donors want to make investments in areas of excellence. So overall, while just looking at the bottom line, we can say that research costs the university more money to support. Overall, that investment in research is going to turn into greater benefits for the entire institution.
Thank you.
Okay.
Moon, I have a question.
Go ahead, please.
On the funding from the state for capital investments, the figure of 246. I thought we were had a figure earlier of 275. Was some of those amounts reduced?
We submitted a total budget of 265 million. And it was 115 million for Mizzou and 50 million each for the other three universities. But in the governor's budget, some of those costs were reduced by about 10%. So that's why we came up with 246.
Okay, thank you.
And we still intend to ask for the full amount. This is a long legislative process.
Right, it's not over yet, right?
Great questions. Any further questions for President Choi? All right. Thank you, President Choi. All right. I will now turn it over to Student Representative Williams for his report. Remington?
Thank you, Chairman Chapman and President Choi. I think we have some slides that are coming up. Thank you. So across the system, the Intercampus Student Council, which is comprised of student leaders from all four universities and also the associated students of the University of Missouri, is really working through several things that deal with digital accessibility, access to campus resources, thing of that nature. But we also really want to thank the students, faculty, staff, and administrators across our system that are helping us achieve what the vast majority of students want, which is high quality in-person learning, which so far this semester, since returning about a month ago, we've all been successful in championing that cause. So thank you for everyone involved in that front. Next slide, please. So a couple student success stories from each university that I wanted to share. These are the first two from UMSL. And on the left there, you see a group of students. There's actually 5 students that participated in the team and several advisors that took part last month in the Midwest Collegiate Cyber Defense Competition Invitational, which was a competition, a day-long competition of simulations that brought together over 25 teams from across the Midwest that competed in cyber defense tasks and simulations of intrusions. And as we talk about across the state and also the nation, the increase in cyber attacks and cyber infiltrations, it's great to see how our university and our system is able to help train students to enter their workforce in such a hands-on and diligent field. And then on your right there, you see Benjamin Eppert, who out of high school entered the United States Navy and served 20 years traveling to every continent except Antarctica, and recently became a single father, and that pushed him to head back to pursue a bachelor's degree. So he decided to do that at UMSL, and he decided to use his experiences from traveling and in the military to major in criminal justice, criminology, and anthropology. And currently he's working at a museum that's exhibiting a newly discovered dinosaur fossil in Missouri. But what was interesting to me is the main reason he chose UMSL was because UMSL, over the other 2 or 3 universities he was looking at in Missouri, honored the Missouri Returning Heroes Act, which allows combat veterans to utilize some of our university resources, but in the same way allows our university to kind of thank them for their service to not only our state, but the nation. So thank you, Benjamin, for what you've done for our country and what you're going to continue to do for our state after you graduate. Next slide. So at S&T on January 17th, over 90 students volunteered across Phelps County and Missouri as a whole at various places from Camp Brimshire and St. James, Mound Ridge and Cook Station, and several facilities and philanthropies in Rolla, such as the Rolla Mission. It was just a great opportunity for students to honor the day off they might get from classes from Martin Luther King Jr. Day, but also have an impact in the community that not only houses the campus, but houses them at their time at S&T. And on the left there, I just want to provide a quick update on the Cummer Vanguard Scholars Program, which is something that we've discussed a lot and know will continue to have a great impact on several students, several hundreds of students as they make their way through S&T. So on the left there, you see 4 of the inaugural scholars, and really what they all highlighted, and Matt Minatra said it best, is the program gives them a place to explore the creative side of engineering or whatever field they choose to go into, an outlet for creativity, really allows them to explore their dreams and big ideas in an area where they can ask questions, gain mentorship, gain experiences, and then go out in the world and make an impact, whether that be through their research, their philanthropy, or other things like that, which is exactly what the Cummer gift was intended to do. So just great to update on that real quick. Next slide, please. And at UMKC, the health sciences have really been shining through lately, and that's evident through these two stories. On your right there, you have Kevin Dew, who was pushed to pursue a career in the healthcare industry based off the care and attention he received when his father unfortunately passed away at a young age. He felt like he was really heard through the entire process, which I think is a testament to the healthcare workers' kind of heart in general. And he's pursuing a master's of medical science in the class of 2023. He's very active here at UMKC. He's the president of the UMKC Physician Assistant Student Association. But he really credits the small class sizes, the small cohorts, and the incredible faculty here at UMKC for pushing him to pursue his passion and pursue his healthcare dreams and career goals, but also to stay in his native Missouri and in our workforce, in our healthcare professional workforce that definitely needs continued development. And the same kind of note on the left there, you see Brady Smith, who is from Southwest Missouri. And he has a little bit different story. He was pushed to the pharmacy industry because in middle school, he was assigned to shadow a professional, and he thought the easiest place to go would be close to home. So he shadowed his dad at a pharmacy in Neosho and has never left. So he was recently awarded the Missouri Pharmacy Association Student of the Year Award, which recognizes one Missouri student in pharmacy school, and he was that recipient from the state. So Brady's continuing to do great work and wants to return home to Southwest Missouri after graduation. Next slide, please. And then at Mizzou, who is supposed to be hosting us today, we have a couple great stories. The first is on your right. Grant Houston, who's a junior, has been reselling sneakers and vintage clothing for 8 to 10 years online, but was recently able to move into a kind of brick and mortar front. His store, Hype and Stripes, is located in the Griggs Innovators Nexus in the Mizzou Student Center. So next time we're all able to join on campus, hopefully we can all, or some of us can walk through there and see some of the stores that are popping up. But he really credits the program and the advisors and directors there for helping him put his entrepreneurial spirit and turn it into something tangible that he can work at every day. He can employ people to work at, and people can visit. And some of his stuff's pretty cool. He has older shoes all the way to Mizzou shirts from the Y2K era when several of our curators were on campus. So great spot. Several people had to stop in. And then finally there on the left is Amelia Wilson, who's a Kaffner student. She came from Maryland, and she's a freshman this year. And what really drew her to Mizzou was the opportunity to work with the football team and the quarterbacks coach. And she's actually a student assistant working with the quarterbacks. And what she's really highlighted since she came to Mizzou is she was everything when you first, being a student assistant is almost like a full-time job. But what she was really impressed by is the staff, the coaches, and her fellow players understanding that, we're all students first, whether you're a student assistant, a player, a manager, everything matters. But if you can't get those grades, you can't work on the field on Saturday days or evenings. So she's really pushed by not only the love of the game, but also making sure there's a path for the next generation of women in football, and just an incredible story that Kaffner's highlighted recently. And I'd be more than happy to share the more kind of in-depth links if you all would like to read about that. But just a great story of someone making a difference, not only in her life, but also kind of paving the way for the next generation. So with that, I'll open it up for any questions.
Thank you, Remington. Great report. Any questions for Student Representative Williams?
Thank you.
Remington, as you talk to students on the campuses, and I would agree with Daryl, that was a great, inspiring report. But as you talk to students on the 4 campuses, what would be maybe the two greatest concerns you hear from those students about the unusual situation all of us continue to find ourselves in with the pandemic and what other pressures that they feel? So is that an observation you've been able to make? And can you share any of those concerns that you think it'd be important for us as curators to be aware of?
Sure, thanks. Great question. I'd say before we repopulated and as we were kind of repopulating back to campus, the major concerns that I heard was how do we do it effectively in a way that ensures that we continue to meet in person as much as possible. And I think that's been met heads on with, if you're sick or if you feel sick or anything, whatever the complication might be, the option to join virtually whenever possible has been appreciated and been utilized, I think, in a way that is something that we continue to see going forward. And I think that's kind of subsided. I'd say the one that's kind of came up recently and I think is important on any issue, especially any COVID issues, is communication. So just kind of the clear rules of, this is what the rule is, and this is how we're going to follow it across the board, to where there's when things pop up of, maybe somebody trying to institute a stricter or more loose kind of policy, how do we make sure that person, that group, that organization, or that community member is aware of these are the rules that are put in place. You can go back and see why they were put in place. Not a single person came up with them. So how do we continue to push that single front communication? Here's the guidance that was set by the curators. Here's the guidance that was set by, the local health officials. Here's how we're doing it on campus, and let's make sure it's done consistently across campus and across our university.
Thank you.
Okay, any further questions from Student Rep Williams? Okay, we always appreciate hearing student insights, and thank you so much, Remington. All right, we will move on to the consent agenda next. Are there any questions from the board regarding the consent agenda items? And of course, these items are located in your onboard materials. Any questions? Okay, hearing none, may I have a motion and a second from the board to approve the consent agenda as presented in your materials?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion from the board? Okay, hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed, okay, all those in favor? I heard two.
Aye.
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 All right, all those opposed say nay. Hearing none, okay, are there any abstentions? Okay, the motion carries. All right. Okay, Curator Hobrock, I will now turn it over to you for the Finance Committee meeting.
I need to, there we go. I'm not used to the Zoom again, switching back between screens, so bear with me. Good morning. The Finance Committee has one informational item and one action item for today. The central bank overview and debt portfolio update for the university system. Executive Vice President Brian Rapp will introduce the central bank overview and debt portfolio updates. Assistant Vice President of Treasury and Real Estate Kevin Hogg will present a overview of the university central bank framework and provide an update on the university debt portfolio and credit profile. Ryan, would you please take over?
Yes, thank you, Curator Hobach. We'll have Kevin Hogg go over. He'll provide an update really on how we've utilized when we refer to the central bank, we're referring to something internally, but it's really how our debt, both internally and externally, is structured. And then Mary Jane Darby is with us as well. She is our financial advisor with Janney, and she will give some perspective at the end of the presentation regarding our credit and our debt capacity. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kevin.
Thank you, Ryan. If you want to go to the next slide, one more. So the university set up its central bank in 2010 and transitioned to a portfolio-based approach to debt management. Prior to 2010, the university had been issuing amortizing bonds with maturities matched to specific projects. This diagram shows the fund flows for the central bank. As you can see, external capital is insourced through external issuances. Those proceeds are lent and relent to internal borrowers and repaid by the internal units over the life of the deferred external liabilities. Next slide. The primary objective of the central bank framework is to achieve the most favorable cost of capital within acceptable risk parameters while providing internal borrowers with access to stable and predictable interest rates. Mechanically, that occurs by the bank separating the structure of the internal loans, which are amortizing, from the external debt, which is deferred. The interest rate charged on internal loans is higher than the university's external borrowing cost or cost of capital. As a result of this spread, capacity builds over time within the bank and can be utilized to stabilize borrowing costs or to fund future capital projects. For the central bank to provide a stable borrowing cost in this way over an extended horizon, the size of the portfolio, the duration of the external liabilities, and the spread being charged must be carefully managed. Next slide. Primary oversight of the central bank rests within the university's treasury office. However, we receive support from a number of third-party resources. The central bank's financing team consists of Janie as financial advisor, and you'll hear from Mary Jane with Janie here shortly. Thompson Coburn is our bond counsel, Gilmar Bell is our disclosure counsel, and our investment banking partners of JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley, and Goldman Sachs. Next slide, please. One more. Transitioning to our debt portfolio, the university has $1.7 billion of total debt outstanding with a weighted average cost of capital of 3.44% and an average weighted average life of 14.4 years. Based on the current outlook, we do not anticipate any significant changes in the portfolio for FY22. Next slide, please. The university has good flexibility in use of proceeds, as you'll see here. Approximately 73% of the portfolio is taxable bonds, which have less restrictions, with the balance being 27% being tax-exempt bonds. Total debt peaked in FY20 with the 2020 issuance. Has declined modestly in FY21 just through natural principal amortization. The debt shown here is internally allocated to approximately 130 projects across the system with housing, healthcare, and classroom research facilities representing the largest users of debt. Next slide. The university's primary sources of debt are system facility revenue bonds and commercial paper. The university's revenue bonds carry a AA1 and AA plus ratings from Moody's and S&P respectively. Those are among the highest ratings of public higher ed institutions. Authorized to issue up to $375 million of commercial paper, the university does not currently have any CP outstanding. Next slide. This table summarizes our debt and derivatives portfolio. As you'll see, approximately 85% of the university's outstanding bonds are either non-callable or subject to a make-hold call, providing limited opportunity to refinance the existing portfolio for savings. Next slide. Shown here is the university's debt profile out through 2055. Of particular note is the amortizing slant of the near-term bonds giving way to the bullet structures of the bonds in the out years. This is consistent with that transition we spoke of earlier from a project-based approach to financing to this present portfolio-based approach. Next slide. In addition to any new issuance, the milestones that we've got highlighted here will provide opportunities to reshape the portfolio over the next few years. Next slide. We expect several of these elements to converge in FY24 for a potential bond issue. Initially funded with recycled balances in commercial paper, the Children's Hospital project will be converted to long-term financing once the project is complete. Both the 2014A and 2020A refunding opportunities shown here will continue to be monitored in advance of these respective call and maturity dates, but may line up with the timing of the hospital financing, creating that convergence for the bond issue. With that, I'll open it up for questions on the central bank and the debt portfolio prior to Mary Jane stepping into our update on the credit profile.
Well, Kevin, I'll ask you a question I get asked quite a bit. How do you determine what you charge the different entities for the credit they need? I know we borrow it and then we lend it back out.
Yeah, so the spread is a function of our underlying weighted average cost of capital, so what we're able to borrow the money at, our administrative cost, and then a spread which provides us some ability to stabilize that rate. So, when I say, a spread, we within the bank are absorbing some interest rate risk as the market moves. And so to keep that rate stable, we have to have a spread that allows us to absorb interest rate risks without impairing the operating budgets by adjusting the internal loan rates. So it's effectively that. It's effectively our borrowing cost plus the administrative cost of overseeing the portfolio plus a spread that allows us to keep a stabilized rate.
And how do you define your cost? Typically, what makes up the cost side of that additional fee?
The administrative cost?
Yes.
Yeah, so that's staff costs, that's banking fees, issuance fees. It's the fees we incur to place that external debt and maintain it.
Thank you.
Sure.
I have a question.
Sure.
How does your strategy change on your long-term financing, the issuance of bonds, when it looks like we're starting to enter into a period here of rate increases across the board within the United States and the cost of borrowing? Do you accelerate your issuances, or how do you respond to this upcoming increase in capital across our economics?
Yeah, I think we tend to look at it over a broader horizon than just the immediate rate rise. I think the strategy or the approach in the portfolio is to ideally maintain balance between short, intermediate, and long exposures. So we sort of think of it from the perspective of 20% short, 20% intermediate, and 60% long. The longer duration debt and being long at a low exposure allows us to sort of underwrite this blended rate that we've provided the internal units and not have them experience, if you will, fluctuations in interest rates. So we're able to provide them a competitive long-term rate, not exposed to interest rate fluctuations in the market because we are short in duration. I think for us, the other piece of it is sort of a liquidity risk in that we have to have the portfolio size to the debt demand of the university. And by getting out too long because of looking forward to a rising rate environment, we may take on too much debt or too little debt on that basis. And therefore, I think we want to have a portfolio that's comprised with this balance that allows us to fluctuate up and down to manage both interest rate risk as well as manage liquidity risk for the users.
And then you state in there that I guess the revenues, 1.6 billion in revenues, would help collateralize the debt that we have. What is that? All the revenues of the university? What specific revenues are those that you have pledged?
Yeah, so I can definitely provide you with a complete breakout. It's not all of the revenues of the university, but it is a large portion of the revenues. Ryan, did you want to speak to specific ones?
I mean, I think the pledge revenues are largely our auxiliary type revenues. There are some specific student fees. Kevin and I we can provide you with the full breakdown. The largest pledged revenue in there is our patient care revenue.
From MU Healthcare.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, Kevin, this is Jeff Lehman. I've got a couple questions, please. We aggressively refinance most of our bonds. I think you just made clear there really are no more opportunities, correct, with our current portfolio?
Yeah, so the one opportunity we have would be an advanced refunding of the 2014 A bonds. And we're looking at that, but with still a good amount of time between now and when that call date actually occurs.
Right.
It's been pretty
Okay.
efficient thus far. Yep. That's our
Okay.
one opportunity.
And the spread on, as you called central bank, that we charge ourselves for various projects. What is that about? Can you give me just ballpark what that spread is over our cost of capital?
Yeah, so our cost of capital is about 3.44%, and we're currently charging 4.5%. So that's a weighted average cost of capital that includes our administrative costs. So it's about, call it 95 basis points.
Okay, so that 95 basis points, some of that is to control interest rate risk, right? I mean, that's what you're saying. Some of that's administrative cost. What percent of that is that? That's what I want to make sure. Am I confused on that?
So the weight that administrative cost wouldn't be in that. So the weighted average cost of capital already accounts for our administrative cost. So the balance is just the spread.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Kevin, with the abandonment of LIBOR and the implementation of SOFR, at least in the U.S., does that have any impact on us in the university context and not for profit?
So we do have one swap that is tied to LIBOR that will convert. So we do have some exposure to it and are working through that as others are in terms of what that transition will look like and what the impact would be to the university. But we do have one swap that's tied to LIBOR.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Kevin? Guys, here's your chance to ask the questions you peppered me with time and time again. Okay. Ryan, let's go on and finish the rest of the presentation, please.
Thank you. I think now we'll have Mary proceed with the rest of the presentation.
Great, and good morning, and thank you, Ryan. I'm going to spend a few minutes of talking about the rating agency's views of the university and then the university's credit profile in the context of debt capacity and affordability. Next slide, please. The university has a strong credit profile with Moody's rating the university AA1 with a stable outlook and S&P AA+ with a negative outlook. S&P put the university on negative outlook in April 2020 at the onset of the pandemic, given all the uncertainty at the time. As a side note, the university recently met with S&P for our annual surveillance, and given the tone of the meeting, we are hopeful that the negative outlook will be revised back to stable once the agency goes to their credit committee in the next few weeks. As far as credit strengths and challenges, the agency cite large and growing revenue base, growth in wealth and healthy liquidity levels, solid healthcare performance, and highly effective management and governance as strengths. And challenges, the rating agency cites student demand challenges, that the research profile remains below peers, net pension liability, and high reliance on state funding and net patient care revenue. Next slide, please. As you can see from this slide, the university has a stellar credit profile with only 8 public institutions rated higher than the university by Moody's. And as we all know, debt is a limited resource and must be used judiciously in support of mission. So I'm now going to turn our attention to discussing the university's debt capacity at its current rating level. Next slide, please. We take a 4-pronged approach to looking at debt capacity, which is debt as it relates to the balance sheet, and debt affordability, the ability of the university to absorb the cost of the debt into the P&L. We look at quantitative measures and then pay careful attention to the rating agency's historic commentary, then consider other factors, including future repayment of debt, and finally determine the outcome, which is presented as a range. I will note that this is a point-in-time analysis and will change over time. I will also note that we use Moody's metrics for the quantitative analysis as the data for peers is more readily available from Moody's. Next slide, please. For the quantitative analysis, we selected 2 key debt-related metrics, one related to the balance sheet, spendable cash and investments to debt, and the other related to affordability, total debt to operating cash flow. Next slide, please. For the numerator in this metric, spendable cash and investments, the university is in line with its rating peers, and for the denominator, total debt, the university is weaker than its rating peers. You can see in the table on the right, the university is at the low end of its rated peer group for this metric. We then looked at what additional capacity for this metric alone the university would have, using it as a guideline 25% below the median. And using this methodology, the university would have 125 million of debt capacity. Of note, for this metric, we used FY 2020 data, as FY 21 data was not yet readily available for some of the peers. Next slide, please. For the affordability metric, the university fares a bit better. Operating cash flow of 458 million is slightly stronger than the AA median of 402 million. Using the same methodology of 25%, in this case above the median, the university has additional capacity of 180 million when looking at this metric in isolation. To note here, the data we used here is based on a 5-year average for FY 16 through 20, just to alleviate some of the noise relative to recent operating performance based on the pandemic. Next slide, please. We then turn our attention to the rating agency's commentary. The commentary on this page relates to the language cited in each agency's report on what factors could lead to a downgrade. Over the last 2 reports, the agencies have been consistent and focused on operating performance, with only S&P citing significant additional debt as a factor that might lead to a downgrade. So implying that moderate amount of debt would be fine. Next slide, please. Here we look at other qualitative factors: substantial scale of operations, alignment with the state, management's track record of sustaining operating surpluses, student demand challenges, high reliance on state funding, and patient care revenue. In addition, we take into consideration the near-term future repayment of debt, in this case, 125 million over the next 5 years, not including the $200 million upcoming bullet maturities, which might be refinanced or might be paid down. Next slide, please. In the end, taking all these factors into consideration, we estimate that the university currently has capacity for 125 to 250 million of new debt. But I will say that given FY21 performance, capacity is likely at the higher end of this range. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
No questions from members of the board? Thank you very much.
Mayor Holbrook,
Yes, sir.
I can ask Mary Jane. Mary Jane, what do you see as some potential challenges that you see for public higher education? You evaluate higher education space, so your input will be important.
Sure, President Choi. I mean, I think obviously the demographics is kind of a key thing for large flagship public institutions. And I would say that in my mind, you're ahead of the game addressing that in trying to grow your research enterprise, attracting more faculty and then attracting more students. So I think in your case, that would be what I would say is the kind of the biggest concern on my mind.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Brian, is that
that
conclude this presentation?
item. Yes.
Okay, then we will move on to the action item. Executive Vice President Ryan Rapp will present the university's 5-year financial plan and financial targets. Ryan, please.
Thank you, Curator Holbrook. We can go to the presentation. The presentation is just a summary of what was contained in the materials that were in the board mailing. If we could go to the next slide, please. I just wanted to provide the board with an overview of kind of why we're here today and what we're seeking. The board approved in the fall of 2020 the financial accountability and performance policy. Part of that is the board actually approves the financial performance targets as part of our financial planning process, and that's really what we're here to seek approval for. And then the university leadership, we're responsible for managing within those targets. And then we've gone over, I think, in past meetings what happens if something doesn't, an individual university or MU Healthcare doesn't achieve those targets over time. There are some things that can be contemplated, like lack of participating in the strategic dividend investment, limitations on issuance in debt. The other thing I wanted to remind the board of is these targets come while we're setting this over a 5-year period and it's a long-term financial plan. The targets are actually approved and revised annually by the board. If we go then to the next slide, just as we think about the financial plan and how it relates, it's really the linkage between the strategic plan and then our annual budgets. And it allows us to look at our strategic plans and say, what are our priorities over multiple years? And then it quantifies that our strategy into financial performance over that time frame. And so we look at what is the level of operating performance we need, what are the capital investments, the use of debt. For this to be effective, it has to relate to our strategic plan, and then really look at what are the key drivers that we'll need to achieve to be able to underwrite that plan while maintaining the financial position of the university. So if we go then to the next chart, just to think about this another way, as we talk about this with the chancellors, the health system, and our campus CFOs, what we're really trying to say is, how do we take the next year's 5 budgets, the capital investments we're going to make, the debt we're going to issue, the debt we're going to pay down, and relate that to our strategic priorities, and how will we fund those? And then, we're building these plans as we talked in the previous information item. We're really building these plans on the basis of our financial plans will maintain the financial strength or credit rating of the university. And we would really only look to adjust that based on at the direction of the board and the president. And so the plans that you've seen presented in the targets that have been set are built on with the target of maintaining our current financial strength. So if we then go to the next, I just wanted to touch on use of debt in our plan. I won't spend a lot of time on this because we've just talked about it, but I think there's really 2 things we think about, and you'll see it in the target or the metrics we've picked. There is just the debt capacity, and that really kind of speaks to, how large of a portfolio can we carry, and that's really what we're looking at in terms of spendable cash to debt. And then you look at debt affordability, so can we actually pay the debt back? And that's where you'll see at the consolidated level, we looked at debt to cash flow. For the individual units, we look at a debt service coverage ratio. And really, what we're taking here is a capital markets approach to how this looks. So saying, how's this going to look to our bondholders? How's this going to look to the rating agencies? When we went through our planning, what we really see is it's not so much capacity as affordability that is the limiting factor in this planning cycle. And I think it's, where else would we deploy debt where we can actually amplify growth and generate financial returns? And that's why I think, as Kevin was talking about, that we just don't see right now the portfolio growing much larger than it already is for that reason. And so I think you'll see where the debt usage is focused in this plan is largely with MU Healthcare. And that's probably, at least over the last 5 to 10 years, where we've been able to earn a pretty healthy return. And so it would make sense that we would be looking to apply some debt to that operation as we move forward. If we then go to the next chart, I think this is just giving you an overview of what's in the materials. You can see where we are contemplating the use of debt, what the operating margin targets are. When we set these targets, it was really driven by considering our own plans and our strategy. We did, though, look at our historical performance, and that's why you see some of these numbers set differently. And we also looked at peers. Now, looking at peers wasn't the primary way we set the targets. It was just a way to kind of say, do we think these are reasonable targets? Really what we were saying, if we combine the targets we have, can we achieve the goal of underwriting our strategic objectives and maintaining the financial strength of the university. And I would tell you, this was an iterative process, and it will continue to be, so if you say, well, what happens if it doesn't? Well, then we go back and we work with the individual campuses and universities and MU Healthcare to really adjust and prioritize the plans accordingly. And we'll continue to do that. We can then go to the next chart. This is just providing a summary of the financial targets that we've established and that we're recommending for approval. You can see our overall operating margin target is 2.5%. Our spendable cash to operations is a target of 1.0, which really means we need to have enough money to operate the university. In theory, we could operate the university for up to a year if no cash came into the university. Spendable cash to debt, that speaks really to what our debt capacity is. And then you can see the debt service coverage ratios by the individual operating units. And again, these were set, based on our plans, but also looking to what Kevin and Mary Jane went over this morning. What is it where do we need to be performing in order to maintain our financial profile? And if we go to just kind of what are some of the key assumptions that underwrite this financial performance and that we'll need to deliver on, and we understand, if we don't deliver on certain things, other adjustments will have to be made. We really need to continue to sustain that academic revenue growth. So what does that mean? Really need to maintain enrollment on some campuses. You take some like UMSL, we need to see them actually turn the trend around and see enrollment growth on those campuses. It's assuming that the federal and state resources that are available will be maintained. But I would say, probably even what we're looking at today looks better than we would have expected when we developed those plans, at least in the near to medium term. So we'll continue to make adjustments there. I think the one thing we know is FY21 really did build up our balance sheet. I think as we move forward, how we look at that, though, will be largely contingent upon our ability to generate revenue growth. It's also key that MU Healthcare continue to have a strong level of operating performance. I think one thing is, while we've had strong operating performance, the balance sheet with MU Healthcare is it's healthy. It's just thinner than I think it will be the limiting factor on prioritizing spending. That being said, when we built these plans, they were built with that inflation would remain low. We know we'll have to make some adjustments for the impact of inflation, but I think, when we tend to think about inflation, it's going to have both impacts, on our cost profile, but it'll also have impact on our revenue profile. Then if we go to the next chart, you can see, really this is just translating this into chart format of what the combined plans are expected to deliver. And I think you've got to look at FY20 and FY21 really as a combined year. And when we combine the two of them, it looks much more like our historical level of financial performance. I'd share with you, I think when we had the update meeting with S&P, it would appear to me they're certainly evaluating us by combining those 2 years. But the plans, when we've consolidated them, would deliver the necessary level of operating margin. Again, we're not, trying to achieve this operating margin to just say, how do we put money in our pockets? How do we pay a dividend? It's really, and I think that's the one thing we went through this year and will continue to build on this, is the ability for us to maintain a healthy operating margin is actually what allows us to invest in those strategic priorities that the president and the chancellors have set for their individual universities and the broader university system. If we go then to the next chart, this is just as far as next steps. This does not replace our budgeting process. We will have a budget update where we will talk about specific actions we're planning to take for FY23 in April. In June, the board would approve the FY23 budget. Then we really start all over again with updating these financial plans relative to any changes in our strategy, changes that we might see in terms of state funding and enrollment, and really saying, okay, what are some of the trade-offs we need to make? And then we would bring, again, this set of targets and plans back to the board for approval at this meeting next year. And I think the real thing is, important part is, it's good for us to set the plan, but then we actually have to go execute against achieving those targets, understanding the plan that we've set will not, achieve those targets. It will be the decisions that we make relative to deviations from those plans that ensure we achieve those targets. So if we've got a lot of revenue growth built into those targets and we don't achieve that level of revenue growth, well, that translates into cost reductions that we'll have to make. So I think just continuing to prioritize and make those decisions to maintain those targets will be the key as we move forward. But with that, I'll pause and see if anyone has any questions.
I have a question, Ryan. With the inflation that we're experiencing, you mentioned that we have costs. Our costs are inflating. That's a challenge for us. But also, inflation helps us on our revenues. Now, I can understand that, but I think which ones of our revenues can we expect? I guess we have to get increases in our revenues based on inflation. I mean, how's that affect? Is that tuition? Is that fees?
Yeah. So it's going to, yeah. And I think that's, I don't think it'll be a 1v1 relationship, but while we may have built these plans with low inflation, if inflation's running 7%, I'm not telling you that we think tuition's going to go up by 7%. What I would tell you is probably inflation not increasing is going to be really hard for us. So, it's what does some modest increases in tuition look like? I think we're already seeing it in terms of state support. I mean, it's currently proposed at 5.4%. I know it's not 7%, but that's much higher than what we've historically been used to. And so I tend to think, we'll have to deal with those through each budget as the specific impacts on that. But I don't think, if we layered inflation being higher into these plans, I don't think it would have a huge impact, because you're going to see some of that flow through on the revenue side in terms of tuition, patient service revenue. Frankly, we would have layered in higher state support than we planned in this plan. And then you're also going to see that then come layered into the cost side as well.
Does that change the plan or what your office had thought about moving toward more differential? Does that throw a wrench in that at all, or no?
No, that doesn't change that.
Ryan, Jeff Lehman, I would agree that some of the tuition, or some of the inflation we'll be able to pass on, but I also think it can make it harder to raise inflation, harder on the people that we're raising it on, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I still think, Curator Lehman, to your point, I mean, I think the key for us to continue moving forward is really continuing to pursue the kind of three primary drivers we think about. And one is cost containment, administrative efficiency. The other is revenue growth. And that, when I say revenue growth, that's looking to things beyond just increasing tuition. What are some of those other opportunities we have? Healthcare continues to play a key role in that. Do we have other auxiliaries that can play a role in that? And then the third is, something that I think our provosts, chancellors, and presidents are working on is, how do we continue to improve academic productivity? And if we can do those three things, that's really the key to underwriting this plan as we go forward.
Thank you. I agree. We've got, in my opinion, with the rising inflation, we got to continue to contain cost and continue to find maybe low-hanging fruit that we can repurpose. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions for Ryan at this time? The plan was in your packet, and a proposed motion. So at this time, if there are no other questions, might I have a motion and a second from the committee to approve the financial performance targets for the University of Missouri, Columbia, University of Missouri, Kansas City, University of Science and Technology, University of Missouri, St. Louis, and MU Healthcare be approved as outlined in the materials that was sent to you.
So moved.
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed? Are there any abstentions? Hearing none. Mr. Chairman, on behalf of the Finance Committee, I move to recommend to the full board that the financial performance targets for the University of Missouri, Columbia, University of Missouri, St. Louis, University of Science and Technology, University of Missouri, St. Louis, MU Healthcare be approved as outlined in the materials sent before you.
Thank you. We have a motion on the floor. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Well, do we have any further discussion? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Okay, all those opposed say nay. Okay, do we have any abstentions? Okay, the motion passes.
Mr.
All right.
Chairman, that concludes the business of the Finance Committee today.
Okay, thank you, Curator Holbrook. It's good information. Thank you for putting that together for us to answer some questions that curators have had. Curator Winokur, I now turn it over to you for the Health Affairs Committee report.
Thank you, Chair Chapman. Good morning. The Health Affairs Committee met on January 27th. We had 6 informational items and 1 action item. Dr. Rick Barron will present a summary of these presentations to us this morning. And from these reports, you will continue to see the continued accomplishments and opportunities from MU Healthcare, the School of Medicine, and NextGen. Dr. Barron.
Thank you, Curator Winokur, and good afternoon, curators. Could I have the first slide? Actually, we can go right on to the second slide. I want to start today by providing the board a summary profile of the COVID impact and inpatient situation at MUHC. You can clearly see the spikes in our cases from the beginning of the pandemic in April 2020 until the current time. You all know that the weekly census and hospitalization rates can be very volatile. We reached an all-time high of COVID cases several days ago of 138. And today, the number, which is not on this slide because we just got the numbers this morning, is 105 COVID patients in the hospital, 25 in the ICU, and 17 on a ventilator. And it goes without saying that the most recent COVID surge has had a significant impact in our operations. Next slide, please. Now I want to switch to talking about the growth plan, and this sort of plays off what you just heard from Ryan Rapp. Recently, the president asked MUHC to develop a 5-year growth plan, and we anticipate significant growth of MUHC over that period of time. Our operating margin for this fiscal year will be about $87 million. With the growth that we anticipate, we believe that by FY26, our operating margin will be about $135 million. The primary way that we will achieve such a growth target is through our physician recruitment. The main areas that we are focusing on for physician recruitment are in the areas of cardiovascular and metabolic disorders, which is essentially heart disease and diabetes, neurosciences, oncology, pediatrics, surgery, and women's health. We conservatively believe that we will need at least 100 more physicians across all medical disciplines over the next 5 years. 2 other important components to achieving financial growth are stewardship and philanthropy. There are several opportunities for fiscal savings and growth, particularly in the realm of specialty pharmacy and supply chain, being more efficient through clinical integration and standardization of clinical practices. Next slide, please. I'd like to give you a quick NextGen update. All of our 16 inaugural NextGen NOTs have moved into the Roy Blunt Precision Health building. They and their students are thrilled to be in this amazing space. In addition, the 6 new next-gen imaging nauts have arrived and are busy using this incredible new imaging equipment. Here's a picture of a patient being imaged on the 7T MRI. The new equipment that we have is being used equally for both clinical services and research. Dean Zweig and his team and I continue to work on identifying and recruiting new scientists for the Next Gen Precision Health Initiative. Some of them will be doing research in the new building, and others will be located in another existing space across the campus. Next slide, please. Dr. Julia Settles is the new interim chief compliance officer. Julia is a graduate of the UMKC School of Medicine, my alma mater, and then she graduated from MU Law School. She is the leader of our health risk management program at MU Healthcare, and she has been at MU Healthcare for 6 years. She reported at the HAC, at the Healthcare Advisory Committee last week, that the Department of Health and Human Services offer of Inspector General Monitor verified that the 5-year term of the Corporate Integrity Agreement is now concluded, and that the university has satisfied all requirements of the CIA for development and implementation of an effective compliance program. This is really great news. And Julie and I meet frequently, and she's just doing an incredible job. Next slide, please. Our research expenditures and awards continue to improve, with significant growth in AAU's phase 1 expenditures and all other research expenditures and awards. So far, FY22 has seen a growth of over 26% in research expenditures. So while this is an impressive growth trajectory, and we are proud to share it, we are not satisfied, and we know that we need to do so much more to be competitive as an academic health center for many reasons, but one of them is to recruit the best faculty. Success breeds success, and we need to be able to demonstrate to potential new faculty recruits that MU School of Medicine and MUHC is a place to excel. Next slide, please. So 2 important recruits to OBGYN department are Jae-Wook Jong and Jean Goodman. Dr. Jong is a highly successful laboratory-based reproductive biologist, and his lab will be in the Roy Blunt Next Gen Precision Health Building. Dr. Jong will hold the Dr. R. Phillip and Diane Acuff Endowed Professorship in Medical Research. Dr. Goodman is the new chair of OBGYN and Women's Health. She holds the William T. Griffin, MD, and Roberta Ann Griffin Endowed Chair for the Department of Obstetrics, Gynecology, and Women's Health, and she's a professor of OBGYN. She joins us from Chicago, and she's been extremely busy getting to know her clinical team and spending time on the recruitment of clinicians and researchers like Dr. Jong in her department. Next slide. We are extremely pleased to announce that Dr. Gerhard Hildebrand is joining us this summer as the Francis T. McAndrew Chair in Oncology and the Professor and Director of the Division of Hematology and Medical Oncology and the Director of the Ellis Fischel Cancer Center. He will have a joint appointment in the as a professor in medical microbiology and immunology in the School of Medicine. He comes to us from Kentucky. Oh no, please stay on that slide. He comes to us from Kentucky, and his area of specialization in hematology is bone marrow transplants. So we currently do not have a bone marrow transplant unit at MU. I don't think we ever have. And his arrival, with his arrival, we're busy planning to bring this important service line on to MU. In order to ultimately become a nationally recognized cancer center, it's crucial that we have an active bone marrow transplant service. As a leader of the entire oncology program, he will be recruiting new faculty across all disciplines of cancer. And he will also have laboratory space in the next gen building. It's important to emphasize that Dr. Jong, Dr. Hildebrandt, and Dr. Goodman are all receiving endowed professorships or chair positions. To recruit this high caliber of faculty, endowed positions are crucial. And as you know, these endowments are developed through philanthropic donations. Finally, I want to include Dr. Mitch Goodman to this stellar list. Resident education is a key to our mission, and we are pleased that Dr. Goldman has joined us to be the Associate Dean for Graduate Medical Education. He comes from the University of Indiana School of Medicine. He is an infectious disease expert, which is extremely timely given the COVID pandemic. Next slide. Now to move on to some MUHC information. This is a slide summarizing a number of the operational performance measures at MUHC. We continue to do very well in Vizient rankings, but I do want to emphasize that this is a dynamic metric, particularly in this time of COVID, in which hospital mortality continues to rise and our workforce is exhausted. Therefore, we are very proud of these measures, but we are mindful that to maintain such high rankings in the face of COVID will be an ongoing challenge. Our financial operation margin through the end of, at this point in FY21 is 47.7 million, and we believe that we are on target to have an operation margin between 80 to 90 million at the end of this fiscal year. I do want to mention rev cycle. We have mentioned this in the past, and as you know, we had a slow rev cycle conversion. We had a rev cycle conversion last summer, and when we switched scheduling platforms, and this slowed our balance sheet down a bit, but we believe that this has all resolved. December was a very positive month for collections. Nevertheless, in January, we think we're going to have a drop in collections for a couple of reasons. We had to defer elective surgeries due to high COVID numbers because we didn't have enough nurses at the time to handle a very high inpatient service beyond the COVID admissions. So our team makes deferral decisions on a day-to-day basis. Examples of cases that can wait a week or two are an elective knee surgery. So these are not cancellations. These are just delaying the surgery usually a few weeks. Because of our stable operating margin, we are still able to support increase in funds flow for research recruitment. And this year, we anticipate that we will be able to put about $25 million from MUHC into research recruitment compared to $15 million in the prior year. Because of the resurgence of COVID, we have returned to daily incident and command structure to monitor all the various aspects of how COVID impacts MU healthcare. In the arena of good news, we are pleased to announce that we have come to terms with the third Medicaid provider for the state of Missouri, and that contract will be effective March 1st. Next slide. To continue on the MU healthcare theme, I know you've heard that we have national healthcare workforce crisis. And locally at MUHC, we have 850 open positions, and 350 of those positions are for nurses. While we recruited more than 3,400 employees in 2021, the turnover rate increased from 19 to 28% during the same period. The cost to the system is enormous. For example, we had to spend about $14 million to ensure that we had frontline staff through agency spends with traveling nurses when we had budgeted $2.4 million. And so to address our workforce needs and to redouble our efforts to retain our staff, we are investing in the staffing strategies that are listed here. And I won't go through all of them, but I'll mention, for example, the Tiger Flex program, which has just been developed. And it's a way to have our local nurses have the flexibility of working like they would work if they were at an agency employee, but at half the cost we would pay the agency. They work more flexible schedule, and they have a higher salary hours than our full-time nurses, but they don't get benefits when they do it this way, like if they were a traveling nurse. We are just now rolling out Tiger Flex program, and we will be able to report at the next board meeting how Tiger Flex and all of these other strategies have performed. Next slide, please. Here's another bit of good news. We conducted a consumer perception survey again this year, and we conduct this every 2 years. One of the most important categories of the survey is a question that's called unaided awareness, in which the individual is asked the question that's right on this slide. When you think of the best hospital or health system in the area, which ones come to mind first, without any prompts? We were very pleased to see that in 2021, MUHC rose to 45% from 39% 2 years ago. It's notable that 4 years ago, Boone Hospital was slightly ahead of MUHC. And 2 years ago, we were neck and neck with Boone Hospital. Clearly, MUHC has now risen to the top of the category, and it's very uncommon to see unaided awareness at the 45% level. So this is truly noteworthy. And on my final slide, I want to list some of the challenges and opportunities, and most of which I have already alluded to. Staffing shortages and need to recruit physicians, nurses, and other staff continues to be a huge challenge. Inflation, as has been noted earlier in the board meeting, is going to have an impact on our bottom line. We remain vigilant regarding about cybersecurity issues. With the recent announcement that Oracle will be probably acquiring Cerner, we are assessing how this will impact MUHC, and those discussions are ongoing. And then regarding leadership transitions, we continue to focus on recruiting the top tier talent to the School of Medicine, both as researchers and as pure clinicians. And equally important, on the MUHC C-suite, we have 3 open leadership positions. At the next curators meeting, I hope to report that we have concluded all 3 of these important searches. The one where we are furthest along is the CFO search, and followed quickly behind it by the COO and the Chief Marketing Officer search. And the last slide is just my question slide. So Curator Winokur, that's the end of my report, and I'll be glad to entertain any questions.
Yes, I hope the board members will ask Executive Vice Chancellor Dr. Barron any questions they have. Anybody?
I have a question. Yeah, Doctor, I see that the staffing shortages are important, but I also know that it's extremely hard for a young person to get into our nursing school. Has there been any thought about increasing our capacity to graduate nurses?
I will check with Dean Thompson if they're anticipating any increase in their class size. Maybe President Choi is aware that I meet with her monthly, and I have not heard that they are anticipating any class size in nursing, and we are not in the School of Medicine either. But that's a good observation, Curator Graves. We're actually looking at ways with our School of Nursing to figure out ways that we can entice our graduating nurses to stay here at MUHC. Very few of them stay here. Most of them go back home to their home city, or many of them go back to St. Louis and Kansas City. And I can get you the exact percentage in the future, but it's not high. So I'm having our new Chief Nursing Officer, Shannon Fusick, discuss with Dean Thompson strategies on how we can entice some of our MUHC School of Nursing graduates to stay here. There's a variety of things you can look at along those lines, perhaps loan repayment. There may be other ways as well, but we're looking at that strategy. So if we can just get some of our local, of our graduates to stay here, I think we can accomplish what you're talking about without increasing class size. But that's another strategy.
So increasing class size is a focus at all 3 of our nursing schools across the system. And they're using some very creative approaches, including the accelerated pathway for those graduates that graduated in disciplines outside of nursing. They may have a degree in education or in psychology, but to provide a short, perhaps 12 to 18 months entry into nursing. So that's an effective approach, as well as using simulation where they can to replace the clinical experiences that are required. And so there are a lot of regulations regarding the education and training of nurses, but we're finding creative ways to reduce those barriers. And the new building that's going to be coming online here at the I guess middle of next year, or maybe sometime middle of next year, is going to expand the capacity for more nurses. But you're right, we have to do more to increase our professional programs in nursing, and where we can, our schools of medicine through the rural programs in St. Joe, as well as Springfield, and hopefully other parts of the state. So thank you.
Great question. Other questions? Okay. The only action of the Health Affairs Committee was to approve the minutes of the November 11th meeting, which was unanimously approved by the committee last Thursday. Thank you to Dr. Barron and the MU Health team. And at our committee meeting, I wanted to make sure you all knew we were able to acknowledge the retirement of CFO Kay Davis and strategic support of General Counsel Steve Owens, who will be with his upcoming retirement as well. And to Dr. Barron, thank you for emphasizing that philanthropy is a part of attracting new physicians and researchers. And we appreciate the innovativeness of Tiger Flex and Grow Your Own. Mr. Chair, that concludes the business of the Health Affairs Committee.
All right, thank you, Curator Winokur. Good information. We appreciate the report. Okay, Curator Williams, I now turn it over to you for the Governance, Compensation, and Human Resources Committee meeting. Curator Williams.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. The Governance, Compensation, and Human Resources Committee has 2 actions items today. Number 1, the annual approval of the board standing committee charters. The individual committee charters describe the overall scope of the committee, who serves as executive liaison, and the responsibilities in reviewing and making recommendations on university matters. The charters are reviewed annually, which took place this January. The charters were included in the board materials for your review. The recommendation is that all charters remain unchanged. And I believe that while there may be some that may have some slight changes later, right now we're okay with how they are. So are there any questions from any of the committee members or the board? Hearing no questions, I would make a motion. I would seek a motion and second by the committee to approve the board standing committee charters as reviewed by the committee chairs and executive liaisons, be approved as presented in the materials.
So moved.
Second. Oh, there goes Julia. Julia, you second.
If I can get myself off of double mute, yes, second.
Okay, having got a motion and a second, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The committee, we would now refer this matter for the full board to vote on the charters.
Okay, so we'll take that as a motion by Curator Williams to for the full board to approve the charters. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Do we have any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed say nay. Do we have any abstentions? Okay, the motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The second action item is to move the Governance, Compensation, Human Resources Committee to go into executive session for reasons stated in the meeting notice. Can I have a second?
I second.
Cindy, can we have a roll call?
Yes. Curator Burnsick,
Yes.
Curator Holloway,
Yes.
Curator Winokur,
Yes.
and Curator Williams.
Yes.
You have all committee votes in favor.
Mr. Chairman, that concludes the business of the Governance, Compensation, and Human Resources Committee for public session.
Right. Thank you, Michael. Appreciate it. Okay, Curator Graves, I now turn it over to you for the Academic, Student Affairs, Research, and Economic Development Committee meeting.
All right, today we have two informational items only. We have the System Economic Impact Report and the Inclusion, Diversity, and Equity Report. And we'll begin with the Economic Impact Report. The Economic Impact Report was requested by Curator Winokur in July 2021 to measure the economic value generated by system operations and expenditures throughout the state. The report is a culmination of significant data collection and intercampus collaboration across the system. Here to provide a brief presentation is Paul Umbach, founder and president of TRIP Umbach, a national leader in economic impact studies for higher education, healthcare, and economic development. In addition, Marshall Stewart, Chief Engagement Officer, and Bill Turpin, Director of the Missouri Innovation Center, are on hand to answer questions about how the university will use this information moving forward. To the extent possible, let's hold questions till the end of Mr. Umbach's presentation. Mr. Umbach, you may begin your report to the committee.
Thank you, Curator Graves, and really happy to be here today to present to all of you. We do have some slides that we'll pull up here. This is the second time we've done a system-wide economic impact report. We did one in 2018, and you'll see some significant change, positive change in your impact over that period. Next slide, please. Our company is a pioneer in economic impact. Back in the 1980s, my partner Simon Tripp and I pioneered and developed the first economic impact models that were used for college and universities. And we have about 500 college and university clients all over the country and also all over the world. So we are the leader in this field, and we've enjoyed our opportunity to work again for the university system. Next slide. There are a lot of pieces of information in the report. I think you have, or you will soon receive, a full report at the system level. Today, my presentation is just a high overview. We're also going to be giving each of the different universities individual summary reports. And I do want to say how much I appreciated the opportunity to have each of the university chancellors participate in a committee, and then to have focus groups and interviews and input sessions at their campuses. So this study really involves all the universities working together, and the information I'm going to present today really focuses on the business volume impacts of all of the different universities statewide, employment impacts, state and local government impacts, and then all the spending from students, alumni, staff, visitors, and then all the other spin-offs that happen because of the university system, because of its research, its academic medicine programs, and not just in the places where universities have campuses, but also in all counties in Missouri and in all legislative districts. So we have a great data set that can be sliced and diced as we need with all of these areas. Next session. I can't thank Marshall and Bill enough for coordinating this, and special mention to all of these folks on the slide here. We were able to gather an incredible amount of information in a pretty short period of time. Everybody worked really hard together, and so I appreciate all of the people from the different units and from the different university campuses. Next slide. So let's get into a couple things. First of all, in-plan analysis was used. It's the same tool that your faculty in economics would use, or it's the same tool that's used in extension, economic development, healthcare. And the way this tool works is that I moved my company 5 years ago from Pittsburgh, where I started it, to Kansas City, where I am right now. So when you pay for this study, those dollars count in your operational impact because they went to a Kansas City, Missouri company. Back in the old days, when I would come to Missouri to participate in a presentation or a meeting, my fresh dollars that I brought with me from out of state counted in the state's economy. So what we're counting is the money you spend throughout the system that stays in Missouri, and also the money that you attract in that then gets spent by you. NIH research grants. Dr. Barron in his presentation talked about how research is increasing, and we reflect that in our study. When visitors come for sporting events or to visit faculty or to come in for interviews, all those fresh dollars are counted. So the way the model works is that we track these dollars, and then IMPLAN works out the multipliers. And so the data we're presenting today is for fiscal year 21, and the sources came from the university, but we also have a lot of additional analysis outside of IMPLAN with business spinoffs and the impact of research and commercialization. So we're going to get into that in just a second. Next slide. So here are the numbers. The university system has a statewide economic impact of $6.5 billion in 2021. That's about $1 billion plus more, 1.1 billion more than just 3 years ago, and supporting about 70,000 jobs throughout the state. That's directly and indirectly, and putting about the same amount of money into state and local tax coffers as the university receives. So I think that's always a good benchmark. Are we giving back in tax generation about what we're receiving? And that's good. Now, what's driving that $1 billion is really three things. One was research expenditures and research attraction has increased. The second is that the healthcare and academic medicine programs, not just at MU Health, but academic medicine throughout the universities around the state. And then the third driver was probably in the last little bit of time, more business assistance and growth in the commercial space, and the generation of additional dollars that are spent. So it's really your innovation, your healthcare, and your research that are really driving the economic impact up. And we see that increasing and in the future. And I go back to Dr. Barron's presentation. They have a plan for even more growth in the healthcare and academic medicine sectors. Next slide. So when we look at the research, the academic medicine, and then athletics, we start to see that these pieces are throughout the state, and they're with all the universities. We have breakouts in the report for what research at all the different universities means to the state. Academic medicine, the same thing. And academic medicine, just so you know, is much larger than it was when we first did the study in 2018, because of the addition of MU Health being under the purview of the curators. But this doesn't include the partnerships in Kansas City through the UMKC Medical District and through University Health, Truman, and the other hospitals. We're not counting any of their impact. We're just counting the impact of the academic and research programs in Kansas City. And the same way in St. Louis. The UMSL has relationships with WashU and relationships with Barnes Jewish and others. We're not counting at the impact that might be part of their programs. And then athletics was the first time we've ever, for you, come to a number, $376.8 million in athletic economic impact. And again, that's not just the tigers, it's the tarpians, the miners, and the kangaroos. I actually practiced that so I could get all of them right. Let's go to the next slide. So the individual university impacts are outlined in the report. All of them saw increases, about 30% increase across the board in just a short period of time. I would say that the big driver for MU has been the addition of MU Health. You can see that it's about a $5 billion campus. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is certain things don't fit as neatly as you might want them to. So we took extension, which is Marshall Stewart's area. It's a big area, and that's included in Mizzou's impact as it comes out of the Mizzou campus. And then you see the other campuses, the jobs that are supported. And the other thing to keep in mind is that these are statewide. So that's UMKC statewide impact, but when you break it down by the metro area or by the counties, about 80% of any of the university's impact stays pretty much within their local area. So for UMSL, most of that is in the St. Louis area, although some of it does trickle throughout the state. Let's go to the next slide. Extension is one of the drivers of economic development in the state of Missouri. It's a very important driver. And I think these numbers on this slide really kind of indicate what I mean by that, because if you just take the operations of extension, those are the extension agents that work in the 100+ counties and the independent city. It's 117.8 million. That'd be about the economic impact of a small college or a small university. So it's not a big impact, but when you start to see what extension does, and you start to realize that the programs of extension, there's about a $13 return for every dollar invested in the extension programs. And so you have programs like business development programs, and you can see in the bottom bullet that has helped create and retain 37,000 jobs, attracting 451 million in capital, $1.5 billion in government contracts. So what you have is you have this instigator, this encourager, this driver of economics throughout the state that comes out of a pretty small budget to do an awful lot of impact. Next slide. Alumni are not included in the 6.5 billion. That's in addition. And you can see that 1 out of every 29 employees within the state are system graduates from one of the 4 universities. They make on average about 11,000 more per year than graduates from the average institution in Missouri. One of the reasons for that isn't that English and geography graduates like I was make significantly more. It's the nature of the employment of the universities with engineering, medicine, health science, and then your business program. So you really have the kinds of jobs, you're very directed toward the kinds of jobs that have higher salaries. And the other thing too is that there's about $52.5 billion in economic impact that comes from the working alumni in Missouri. And keep in mind, that's only the working ones. You also have a bunch of retirees, and some of them are receiving, some are former employees that might have pensions and things like that. But these are just the working and living alumni, and it's a big number. Go to the next slide, please. In addition to the billions of dollars in economic impact from alumni and all of the other billions of dollars in economic impact from extension, we also have charitable giving and volunteerism. These are based on national standards for what faculty, students, and staff donate in time. One thing we know from all the studies we've ever done is students are more likely to volunteer than give money, and faculty and staff are more likely to give money than volunteer, although they both do both. And it turns out to be a big impact. And this is very localized. You're going to find that where the university has a presence, you're going to see a lot more of this value. Last slide. So although economists sometimes debate whether you can use terms like ROI, and so what I always like to say is that for every dollar that you received in state funding, was this somewhere around $400 million. You would know the exact number, and we have it in the report. If you then just look at the operational impact, that $6.5 billion number, you see about $15.49 on one side of the equation in impact for every $1 that you receive from the public. And one thing I want to make real clear is that your public investment is very, very important, and it's foundational to your strength. It is very important that the lawmakers throughout Missouri know that you receive this money and that you do something with it. But that kind of return shows, in my mind, that the University of Missouri system is, I can't imagine a better investment that the public could make when you consider how much is returned. And that doesn't even include the impact of alumni and volunteer services, and it doesn't include all those other impacts we talked about with extension. So if you took the University of Missouri system out of Missouri, you'd be taking more than $6.5 billion out of the economy. I think that's a real important message to drive home. I think that might be the last slide. Oh, yeah, next steps. We have a report that you'll be receiving that we're really proud of. We think it really tells the story. It's something that can be very beneficial in your outreach. And then I want to thank all of the chancellors again, and also my friend, Dr. Choi, for being involved with this report as well. Having the campus, the university breakout reports will be a new thing this year. And what I hope will happen, and I encourage to happen, is that in each of the places where there are university campuses, there'll be an opportunity to promote this locally. And then we also have breakouts for the legislative districts, House and Senate, so that we can start putting in the fact sheets that you folks provide for the legislators, so they can see how much economic impact is in their home districts. I open it to questions, comments. I'm going to thank Curator Graves for giving his input, and also Curator Winokur for her input. This was a real team effort, and I appreciate the opportunity today to present this story to you.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions or comments related to the economic impact report?
Curator Graves, I have a comment. Chancellor Kristen Soblik, and for my perspective from the University of Missouri St. Louis, this economic impact report is going to be huge for us, and it really helps us tell our, in essence, story of the impact that we have on the region and the state, and will be used in so many venues as we move forward with the comprehensive campaign, as we move forward with our story within St. Louis, and aligning with the economic growth and development of our region and the state. So I really value working with Trip Umbach. I'm looking forward to talking further about this report, and this has been great. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Any other questions or comments?
Curator Graves, the only comment I would have, I agree with Kristen. This has been really helpful. In fact, as the slides came up, I used my iPhone to take pictures of almost all of them. But I think this is can segue into a great opportunity for we as curators, because we do have a good story to tell. And I suspect I'm not any different than all of my colleagues on the board, that I occasionally get negative comments from people who come to me and have comments about the university or questions or communications they want to make. And if we can individually take the opportunity to respond to whatever concern that they might have that they want to share or complain to us about, but then point out that what these graphs show, the slide on strengthening the Missouri economy, the transformational impact statewide that the university has, the impact that each of the universities have on our state, and particularly the extension impact in rural Missouri and the economic value. If we can work those into conversations with the folks that come to us and want to complain, it's a great opportunity. And I think coming from curators, it takes on new meaning. So I thought this was an excellent opportunity to remind us that we have a role as advocates, as curators.
Yeah, good point.
Can I just ask a clarifying question, Curator Graves? I think you and I both asked this in the presentation, that the material is put together in such a way that when redistricted, it can be adjusted quickly to match up those new districts. I just wanted to make sure everybody knew that. And then I thought it'd be good for Cameron maybe to speak. You mentioned this, the point, Chancellor Sobolik, about stories. That I know that Cameron Farwell has a whole plan for people to really understand the impact, and I thought that might be helpful, Curator Graves.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think you all saw that great factual information is gold for people like us, because it gives us those nuggets of fact to share with the legislature and our citizens and our community supporting the universities. So what you'll see is we have members of the press who attend this meeting. They'll be writing a lot about this report. And then the rich reports that will come out on each campus give us yet another opportunity to dig down. But what you'll see is you will see the stories that drive these numbers coming out over a long period of time, 6 months or a year. You will see us unpack all these different, because these numbers represent powerful stories that happen at the ground level that really impact lives throughout Missouri. So I really commend the firm for giving us such rich data to begin to tell those stories. But this is just the beginning for us.
Anyone else? Well, I'd like to go ahead. I'd like to thank the team for the very informative presentation, and there was a large working group that worked on this. Thank you all for your time. Thank you.
Thanks, Curator Graves, and thanks everybody, and good luck with this. I'm excited to be a teammate to help present and promote if I can.
All right, thank you. So next on our agenda is the Inclusion, Diversity, and Equity Report. The chief diversity officers from all 4 universities have participated in a collaborative effort to develop system-wide inclusion, diversity, and equity focus areas. Here to provide a brief presentation on these priorities is Maurice Gibson, MU Vice Chancellor of Inclusion, Diversity, and Equity. In addition, the CDOs from UMKC, UMSL, and Missouri and S&T have joined us via Zoom to answer questions concerning their respective campuses at the conclusion of the presentation. Dr. Gibson, go ahead and begin if you'd like.
Thank you, Curator Graves. And I'm going to take your cue. You said brief twice, so I'll make sure I get through this in the allotted time. Good morning, Board of Curators. Thank you so much for inviting me today to present on behalf of my colleagues at the other 3 campuses today to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion at the system and how we can have uniform goals throughout. Before I begin, I'd like to first thank Curator Winokur for starting this conversation last year and really engaging us in some thoughtful debate and some thoughtful dialogue. And also thank Chairman Graves for allowing us to present today under his committee. So before I begin, I want to just share, next slide, I'm sorry, next slide. These are the chief diversity officers at all 4 campuses. As you all may recall, we no longer have a system office. Each campus will be responsible for its unique diversity, equity, and inclusion initiative. So these are my colleagues at each of the other campuses. Next slide. Before we get into the heart of this conversation today in this presentation, I want to start out just with a foundational understanding of what is diversity, equity, and inclusion. While we understand that each of those words individually could mean something different, here at the UM system, we like to say that diversity, equity, and inclusion is a set of strategies and principles to ensure that no matter your background, no matter where you're coming from, that you will be successful on each and every one of our campuses. We take a very broad and expansive notion of what is diversity to include some of those attributes and characteristics that historically may not have been included in diversity. So for instance, rurality, being from a rural place, veteran status, there are all sorts of different diverse categories that on our system campuses we do include to make sure that we're providing the absolute best and most expansive services for our variety of stakeholders. Next slide, please. So as we begin this conversation on identifying what shared system goals would look like and how we would implement them, we started out with the Missouri Compacts, specifically the principle on inclusive excellence. That principle essentially says, in a nutshell, that we're going to make sure that we create challenging and engaging professional development opportunities for our stakeholders. And more importantly, we're going to make sure that our climate is supportive, one that makes sure that whoever you are, you can be successful. So faculty, students, and staff can all be successful. We want to make sure that we removed any barriers to that success, whatever they may be, to make sure that, again, on our campuses, you will indeed achieve your goals. And lastly, and probably of chief importance, is making sure we're continuously achieving excellence. And excellence as it relates to student success, research, and our creative works to create a meaningful and productive environment. Next slide, please. So these are the three goals that we've said as chief diversity officers that we'd like to see across each of our campuses implemented in a consistent way. The first relates to DEI training, which I'm going to go into more detail on all three of them. The second, inclusive employee recruitment practices. And the third, inclusive teaching practices. Next slide, please. So our first goal, the DEI training, what we realized as CDOs when we came together was that we all provided meaningful training. And what we've decided is that we want to make sure no matter what your entry point to the University of Missouri system is, whichever campus you come on, there will be consistent training. So we provide that foundation so that we have a shared understanding of what common diversity and inclusion topics are. We want to make sure that as we prepare our students to go out into the global workforce, that they were multiculturally competent, right? So they knew how to interact with people who were different from them, who came from different backgrounds. Know that we want our students to be competitive in the workforce. We wanted to make sure that we engaged our students so that when they did go out into the workforce, they knew how to interact and engage their constituent audiences. And most important, as we look at diversity, equity, and inclusion training, we wanted to make sure that everyone had the freedom of expression, that we invited civil discourse, and that we encourage intellectual pluralism. What we did not want is for any of our programming or initiatives to feel like it was ostracizing anyone or that it was excluding participants. All of our training is meant to be welcoming, to be inviting. All of this training that we provide from the DEI offices are optional training. So we hope that as we invite people to gain a better understanding on diversity, equity, and inclusion topics, that they indeed will feel comfortable sharing their perspectives and that we can create that robust dialogue. Next slide, please. So as we go through, we'll have a couple of examples from each of the institutions on one of the goals or another. And our first example comes from MS&T. They have an absolutely phenomenal program that they train incoming first-year students during their orientation week as part of their minor values training. And here, it's just the baseline training where they make sure that incoming students understand just the fundamental and foundational concept of diversity and inclusion and what that means for their community members. Most importantly, they make sure that everyone within this training, that they're able to convey and communicate their ideas freely. Right. So we're not suggesting that one idea is going to be perpetuated more than another. It's a free and open exchange of ideas in this training. Next slide, please. At UMSL, they have an absolute phenomenal program that allows you to get a transfer certificate in workplace diversity, equity, and inclusion. Over the last year, there were almost 1,000 faculty and staff were trained through this program. And again, it provides that foundational shared understanding of what diversity, equity, and inclusion means within the workforce. Next slide, please. Our second goal, inclusive employee recruitment practices, is one that we're all striving to work harder towards. And what this essentially means is making sure that as we attract the absolute best and brightest to our campuses, that we're thinking about inclusive practices, right? So we're not starting at the point of hire, we're starting even before that. How are we training our search committees? What are we doing to recruit in places that we typically have not recruited from? How are we best arming our recruiters to sell each of our individual campuses so that we do incorporate and have a workforce that is reflective of our population in Missouri? Next slide, please. At UMKC, they have a program where they conduct a faculty search support team. And what this essentially means is that they make sure that all faculty committees that are going to search for new faculty members, that they're trained and they understand evidence-based strategies to promote diverse pools. And what this means in practice is that before a search committee starts the process, so going through applications and so on and so forth, that they meet with the chief diversity officer or her designee to make sure they understand how to be inclusive in their recruitment. I think a very important aspect of this entire plan is that the hires live with the individual departments, right? As CDOs, what we want to make sure is that they're equipped and they understand the best practices to reach the broadest audiences of individuals. Because what we want to make sure is that we maintain and continue to attract the best and brightest at the University of Missouri system, and that we make sure that in each of these places where people have to recruit, that we provide the expertise on how to get those individuals. Next slide, please. At the University of Missouri-Columbia, we are starting the process of recruitment much earlier. We have two phenomenal pipeline programs. Our first is our Preparing Future Faculty Diversity Postdoctoral Program, which invites newly minted PhD graduates to our campus to work for 2 years in the department of their discipline. And through that time, they get mentoring. They learn essentially how to be a faculty member. And at the end of that 2-year period, some have the option of staying at the University of Missouri-Columbia, and others, they go out into other places and work. But what this program does is it invites diverse candidates to get that first preview into the faculty world. And what we're hoping is that through this program, that we will have a consistent pipeline of available diverse candidates, people that have already worked with us that could potentially come back to be faculty members. And our second program, which isn't listed here, but I wanted to make sure we shared, is our Faculty Inclusive Excellence Fund. This program, it rewards those departments that go out there and they aggressively recruit diverse candidates as it relates to the needs of their respective departments. And we provide all sorts of different types of funding. So whether it be research support, whether it be lab support, whether it be other types of financial assistance, we make sure that we provide that for those departments who indeed go out there and recruit diverse candidates. Next slide, please. Our last goal, before I open up to any questions, relates to inclusive teaching practices. This goal, as all of the CDOs have agreed, this is going to be one of the most important aspects of our work, particularly over the next 5 to 10 years. And that is how faculty members engage with their students. We understand that we are certainly in a more virtual society, and our students are coming to us at varying levels and varying backgrounds, right? What we're suggesting is that we want to make sure that professors are empowered to engage students, not in a way that diminishes the content or the quality of instruction, but engage them so they can be successful. We want to promote inclusive pedagogy, which means that professors now are taking a very broad approach to the way that they're instructing, that they are engaging their students, those students who may not be comfortable in a 100 or 200 lecture hall, students who may be from places of, graduated with a class of 80, that professors know how to engage that student as well. So really taking into account the backgrounds of students so that we promote success and make sure that they can graduate on time and be successful. Next slide, please. And here I want to highlight two initiatives, both from the University of Missouri, Columbia, and then later the UMKC. At the University of Columbia, we have two initiatives. One was a pilot initiative and the other one is ongoing. The first from our Teaching and Learning in the Diverse Classroom, which is sponsored by our Teaching for Learning Center. They host a small cohort each year. They take them through the Kenora University online course, which is about a 5-week program. And then they host various check-ins throughout the year for the cohort to meet, exchange ideas, and really talk about how they can be more inclusive in their teaching. And then our second initiative, which was piloted from 2018 through 2021, is our Faculty Institute for Inclusive Teaching. Out of the 60 participants that have gone through that program, each of them have said their teaching has been strengthened by virtue of going through this program and understanding how to really be inclusive in their teaching methodology. What we're hoping, though, is that as our budget allows, we're able to scale those programs up so that we can reach more faculty members. Next slide, please. At UMKC, they also have a Faculty Institute for Inclusive Teaching, and theirs is the Faculty Institute for Teaching Inclusive Curricula. A year-long program, has numerous workshops throughout the year, and most importantly, they make sure that participant faculty in this program, that they are advised on the best practices of the day on how to implement inclusive teaching. Next slide, please. Here, as I end, I want to just share some of the reach and impact of various programs throughout the various campuses. First, S&T has had almost 2,500 incoming first-year students that participated in their minor values training during orientation week. UMSL, since 2020, almost 300 faculty and staff have attended at least one of the optional DEI training sessions. UMKC, since 2019, close to 10,000 faculty, staff, and students have been trained in a variety of different diversity, equity, inclusion trainings. And then since 2018, over 5,000 faculty, staff, and students have participated in at least one of the Mizzou ID training programs. And I think what really makes this fascinating is that these are optional programs and initiatives and trainings for people to take advantage of. One where you can come and you can really get a better understanding of diversity, inclusion, and equity. And most importantly, one where you can come and not feel afraid that you don't know the right answers, but that you can be empowered to learn more about these subject matters. That is it for me, and I will turn it back over to Chairman Graves, and if there are any questions, I'd be happy to entertain those.
Yeah, does any questions, anyone?
I've got one, Dr. Gibson, and it's really good to see you today, but I've got a quick question for you. Regarding this inclusive teaching practices, let's talk about that for a second, because it seems as though perhaps in a biochemistry class, I'm not sure what that means versus a political science or sociology class. In some of these hard sciences classes, I'm not sure what inclusive teaching may mean. Can you give us a specific example of how that's applicable in a biochemistry class versus a political science class or sociology class where it may be more relevant?
No, that's an excellent question. And thank you for there, Chairman Chapman. And as we've been sharing and explaining, you're right. At the onset, it sounds as if professors will be asked to teach differently, which is not what we are advocating in inclusive pedagogy, inclusive teaching. I want to give you two examples of how this plays out in a classroom. First, and this would have been probably in about 2010, 2011, when I was teaching in middle school, and we gave the LEAP test. There was a question that asked, which one of these men are going to work? So one of the examples was a man in a suit. The other example was a man in overalls, so like essentially a farmer. And the other example was a guy out on a beach, so he just had on shorts. 80% of those students chose the guy in overalls and a straw hat. because we lived in rural Fairleigh, Louisiana, where agriculture was king, and where they would see people go out in overalls and a hat out into the field. And they equated a man in a suit with going to church. So what we're advocating that is that as we make examples in the classroom that should be applicable across backgrounds, across experiences, that you take into mind that not everyone comes from the same place and not everyone has the same frame of reference. So in Fairleigh, Louisiana, going to work did not mean wearing a suit, right? So as someone who, as a professor or a teacher who's giving examples, you should think about that as you engage your students and your audiences. Now, if we take this to higher education, and you used a good example in the STEM related field. So I'll take it. There was a nursing course, and there was a variety of examples, and it asked which one of these individuals would be more likely to have sickle cell anemia than the other. And as we know, sickle cell is predominantly associated or affects African-American, Black Americans, right? So the examples had George Washington, had another example, I can't remember who the person was, but the correct example was Kunta Kinte. So what I'm sharing is, and obviously we know that's a fictional person with Alex Haley's roots, but what I'm saying is that as professors, we should know how to make sure that what we're delivering is inclusive of everybody in the room. How that example could have affected someone in the room. I understand they were trying to get at which person in this group is of African descent. However, there are much better ways to do that. And if you are trained in inclusive teaching, you would have done something different. You would have said, Mike Tyson or someone else to denote this is what I'm trying to get at. And it's not suggesting the professor was malicious. But what we're saying is that had the professor taken a much broader, step back at how they were teaching and how they were instructing, they would have made sure their delivery method was inclusive of all the backgrounds and perspectives in classes. So those are two examples. And the last thing I want to share is that what we're asking is for more engagement with our student populations and our students in our classroom so that we can understand early on how we need to make interventions to make sure those students can succeed. Is there a student who's always quiet in class? It may not mean that they didn't read. It could mean that, like I said earlier, this student graduated from a class of 20, and now being in a room with 100 people is frightening. And we need to be able to pull that out, and professors have to be able to understand that. So this is what we mean by inclusive teaching, really being inclusive in how you engage your students. And this can be done despite whichever type of discipline you're in.
Chairman Chapman, this is Molly Agrawal. Could I give an example, if you don't mind, from my own field?
Please.
So this is biomedical engineering, and I used to teach a course called Intro to Biomedical Engineering for freshmen. And if you looked at all the textbooks, the first couple of lectures were basically focused on the history of looking at the ancient civilizations and where did this come from and how did medical treatment start. And most of the books started with the Greeks. And that was about, maybe 500, 600 BC. But if you delve into history, the ancient civilizations that were in China and India and Egypt actually were doing a lot back, 1000 BC, 1500 BC, and actually set the tone for what came later. And so, when I wrote a textbook, which I did a couple of years ago, I included those. So that's a little bit of where do you start? Are you inclusive? Are you throwing the net wide enough to see what happened where? So just even from a STEM area, that's just a small example.
Chairman Chapman, I have a question, if I may.
Yeah, it's Curator Graves' subcommittee committee meeting. So yes, go ahead. Go ahead, Mo.
I'm sorry, Curator Graves, if I may ask a question. This is for Dr. Gibson. Dr. Gibson, I sent out a Friday email to a wide constituency. And on the Martin Luther King week, I sent my Friday's email, and I talked about inclusive equity, diversity, and it was a long email that I sent to everybody. To my surprise, I got a number of pushbacks purely on the word equity rather than equality. I am talking about, long 5-page thesis on, why we shouldn't use the word equity versus equality. And so the first one I saw, I read, I nicely responded, and then the second one and the third one. And from no others but major executives from large corporations, other universities, and all of that. Could you please shed some light on that and help me understand why the pushback?
No, thank you so much for that question, and I'll keep this brief through my own experience. The first suggestion I'll have is if you don't utilize Cameron Farwell and her team, use them because they make sure we stay out of some of those debates. But seriously, there's this. So with each passing year, it increases in how people want to convey their commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. At one point, as you know, equality was the goal. But then as people begin to think about it, equality means everyone has the same access to all sorts of resources, right? Equity means that if you started further behind, you may get a little more to make sure you can catch up with the rest of the field. Quite frankly, I'll be honest, I think that in your case, that we have individuals who are always looking for reasons to poke holes in what we say. And you were making a very sincere message as it relates to MLK, which has no bearing on the work that you and I know Anitra does on that campus, but it allows for people to poke holes in the work that we do. So I will suggest that what you said was not wrong, but the differentiator right now is that there are more people vocalizing equity matters than equality, because the equality for some still means an uneven disbursement of resources.
And I understood the difference going in there, but it is, I was worried that if I use equality, I'd be off the mainstream of the message, because, equity, inclusion, diversity is what is, carrying the message, if you will.
No, and again, it's honestly just, as you pointed out, a fine distinction. And I would argue that using it is not improper because we still look forward to equality amongst this nation, right? That was just, individuals taking an opportunity to, kind of hammer home a point that in your case still manifests on your campus in ways that are productive for your populations. But unfortunately, people, they don't give us that benefit of the doubt, right? To be able to, articulate what we mean and what we're saying without fear of someone taking it out of context.
Very good, thank you.
I did have one question. I have had reach out from many parents and many students that some of the diversity training, and this isn't on a, it's not the rule of the university or any of the universities, but individual instructors, perhaps, they're not about diversity of thought, they're about training uniformity of thought. And you've made many statements on how we want to listen to everybody and think about it. And there are some professors, frankly, who've been hostile to opinions that don't align with their own. And how does your office deal with that sort of issue?
That's an excellent question, and thank you for that, Chairman Graves. I'll start out with this: the trainings that are done through the various offices, which are headed by CDOs, we make sure that we do embrace intellectual pluralism and that we have that diversity of thought. So I want to start out there to make sure that the board knows that from our offices, that is the rule of the day. When we talk about individual departments and colleges, I'll say it this way. We have no direct control over that. However, as a response to what we've been seeing kind of around in some departments and colleges, we're working more, I can at least say on the University of Mizzou's campus, we're working more collaboratively with department chairs and deans to make sure that instructors who engage in the subject matter, that they really do not only understand it from an academic discipline, but they also know how to deliver it in their coursework. Because sometimes, as we know, as we get into these very complex and heated debates, we automatically divert to our way of thinking, our side, our perspective, and forget our role as educators and professors. And it is that to encourage debate. I shared with the president a couple of weeks ago in my history classes, I always take the opposite side of what I feel, because it makes sure that it keeps me, one, it keeps me honest, and two, it ensures that I'm not going to double down on my own biases. And we're hoping that as we talk to more colleges, and this is going to be part of the training we have for faculty members, that we encourage them to think about that. Because in most cases, I don't think it's malicious. I think it's instinctive that people will default to their own kind of ways of thinking. However, if we make sure that we push and that we're monitoring, how individuals are delivering, particularly this diversity work, that they are keeping that in mind, that we do embrace academic freedom, but we want to make sure that all perspectives are being appreciated and welcomed in the classroom, because we are the training ground for this new generation, and we have to make sure that we're held accountable to that. So succinctly, we're more aware now so that we can understand, all right, these are the kind of things that we should go through. And two, and more particularly, we're making sure that every time we talk about these issues, every time we talk about this subject matter, that we're opening up and being expansive to all populations. And that eventually, although obviously we don't have any direct responsibility over academic affairs, working with the provosts on our campuses, working with deans, and working with department chairs to make sure that they understand.
Any other questions? Yeah, Moon?
Curator Graves, in response to your question, please let us know when there are concerns that are raised about instructors creating a hostile environment in the classroom. And we will look into those matters, because that's just not acceptable. That is not acceptable in a university setting where a hostile environment is created. The value of inclusion, diversity, and equity programs is to engage all members of the community to share their perspectives so that it can improve the teaching and learning, research, and engagement. And when we are made aware of those situations, we do discuss it with the instructor. And it turns out in many cases, perhaps the instructor was not aware of his or her impact. So it becomes a learning experience. And we're able to come to a good conclusion in that case, in cases like that. But please let us know. And we know that academic freedom is the foundation upon which this university and many others are built. But academic freedom also has its boundaries. It has restrictions, and we must all recognize what those are, because it is an important privilege. But with that privilege comes responsibility. But please do let us know when these situations do happen, because we don't want any member of our student body to feel that they are in a hostile environment, or feel that they can't share their views for fear of being ostracized in the classroom. And it really is the instructor's responsibility to create an open, inviting environment that includes the perspectives of the students in the class. So thank you for letting me know, and we will continue to work with our faculty. Yes, Curator.
Chairman?
Yes, and thank you, Maurice, and thank you, Moen, for that. We've heard a lot about critical race theory over the past couple of years. It's become quite the topic, politically and somewhat polarizing. Is there a link between critical race theory and DEI practices? I mean, so is anything that is taught, and I think that some of us may be confused about what critical race theory is. I've heard different definitions of it, but is any of that kind of the foundation of how we do DEI, or how we put in DEI practices? Is there a link at all? Maurice, I'd be happy to, please let me know what your thoughts on that question are, if the question even makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Curator Chapman. And we've not had this discussion yet, so I'm happy to. I'm very glad you asked that question. To be the short answer is no. There's not a link in a kind of in a causality way, right? Critical race theory is amongst hundreds of theories that one can approach and use in their academic disciplines. And as it came out of the legal field to understand our social constructs in this country. So that's that part. The only linkage, if you can make one, is critical race theories talk the discussion about race. And as we know, race is one of the diverse concepts. However, in the work that I do, and I can't speak for my other colleagues, but I'm sure they would agree, we don't use critical race theory as the lens in which to deliver our DEI training. The most important reason why is that it wouldn't be appropriate in the way that we deliver DEI training. Since critical race theory focuses on one exclusive area, then there's no way we'd be able to implement a robust infrastructure of DEI training and programming if we were to utilize it, particularly as we talk about how broad diversity is. Critical race theory says that race is the one thing that, well, not one specifically, but they use race as the underpinning for all sorts of societal issues. However, in ID work, we're saying that diversity is expansive and that it can include all sorts of areas, even not related to race. One that I've championed a lot is just rurality, coming from a rural place to an urban space. That is a huge area, being a first generation college student. And again, that is not race determinative, right? I met with a white student who was a first generation student from a farming community, graduating class of 18. We had more in common than some people that I could talk to who came from more affluent places. So to answer your question, no, that is not the framework or the undergirding for the work that we do in DEI training. And quite frankly, it's separate when we have these types of conversations. Critical race theory is really more in the academic sphere, quite even more frank, really in a graduate sphere than it would be appropriate to the work that we do.
Thank you, Dr. Gibson.
Any other questions?
I have one. Can you talk about how you all define diversity? Because I think that's something we've had different conversations, and I'm not trying to have you do the Webster definition, but I know this week the Chronicle put out an article on how to look at rural students being in universities and trying to come up with an indicator. I thought that was interesting, but I know I've had that chance to have that conversation. I want to make sure everybody else has too, of the different types of ways you're thinking about our students and the different type. I mean, many of them fall in multiple categories if we chose to do that.
Mm-hmm. No, excellent question. Thank you, Curator Winokur. Well, number one, I think it's important for us to start at the same place, right? And it's in a very just kind of fundamental way. Diversity is appreciating differences, and notice that that's probably as broad as one can be, right? And I think it's important that we start out with that broad definition so that we are not in a situation where we're rigidly thinking of diversity in terms of race and ethnicity or gender, that we're really thinking about how are these differences, one, appreciated, and two, will these differences be an impediment to success on a college campus? That's how the 4 CDOs are, and I'm speaking for them, so please correct me if I'm wrong. That's how we are defining diversity on our campuses and our communities, because again, there are several students that have multiple identities, as you said, and one identity could be affecting their success in ways that the other one is not. For instance, we have several initiatives in programming right now aimed at Black students and trying to make sure that we close the gap, particularly for Black males. However, what about a Black male who also comes from a rural place, right? Are we lumping in the interventions that for him into someone who came from St. Louis or someone who came from the Boot Hill? So really understanding those differences, right, and what it takes for them to be successful is how we define diversity here. And again, it includes rurality, first generation students, veteran status, ability, disability, a full range of identities that I think it's important for us as a system to be able to articulate that, so we don't default to what someone may think it is or fill in the blank, or it only means this, because it really doesn't. It's a much more expansive concept and in term, and I'm hoping as we now are embracing these shared goals that we take this opportunity to do a reset on how we engage diversity, equity, and inclusion so that we are providing the most robust set of initiatives and offerings for our populations.
Dr. Gibson, I've got one more question. This is something really important to me. So to me, it seems as though socioeconomic status would be probably the most important factor, because we got rich Black kids, we got rich white kids, we got poor Black kids, we got poor white kids. And it seems as though to me, that we would be focused more on socioeconomic status than kind of arbitrary things where you could have a very wealthy Black kid, at Mizzou that's could do just fine for themselves. How are we on pulling out marginalized people based on socioeconomic status? I think that's the biggest factor besides race and gender that holds people back, from going to the next step. Socioeconomically is where you started at. So can you discuss that a little bit?
I agree with you. I agree with you. And we don't spend enough time there. And I had this conversation with student government, and I shared with them the challenge we are having in IDE, focusing programming on socioeconomic status, or essentially looking at programming that is tailored towards those students who may have come from either working class or somewhere in that range. And the explanation I gave them was that students are typically more in favor of associating with one identity over another one. No one wants to come to college and be known as poor or coming from a working class. Well, I won't say no one in an absolute way, but many students, we are challenged to, for instance, we had a program that was focused towards those students who get Pell Grant, and Pell eligibility is determined on family contribution. So typically if you fall within a certain range, then you get a Pell Grant. And those who get the most typically have an estimated family contribution of 0, which means their family can't contribute to the cost of their education. We had a program tailored at them. We invited, it was about 300 students. 6 students showed up. And we talked to them, just kind of gave them an idea of services and so on and so forth. But we sent the follow-up to students who didn't come, didn't get a response. And I happen to know one of the students personally. So when we met in my office a month later, I was like, why didn't you come to the meeting? And he said point blank, people don't need to know that I'm poor. They don't need to, I'm here like everyone else. I'm here participating. So why does that even matter? And it dawned upon me that we have to find a way to support these students without them really appreciating that they're here by virtue of this kind of category, because that's the one that just people just don't want to be associated with. So my quick answer to you, Curator Chapman, is that we certainly reach out to these populations and these students more often than not. The challenge is just not wanting to be associated with that identity, because of how we have basically said that being poor is bad, or having working class poor, that's a bad thing, and we have to change that perspective before we really begin to see some of those gains. So I won't say that we don't meet with any of those students or we don't outreach, but we certainly don't meet with enough of them, because there are so many more that could benefit from our offerings than actually come because of that problem. So we're working towards it. We don't necessarily have the solution yet, but that doesn't mean that we're not keeping that in mind and continuing trying to find ways to support them.
Well, I will throw this, and I appreciate your answer, but all identities that people are associating with these days have at some point in time been treated badly. So the poor or whatever, socioeconomically challenged or poor or whatever it may be, is just another identity that it may have been viewed negatively. So I think that moving that direction takes this issue and makes it less polarizing. I think we get 90% to 100% of people behind that effort, socioeconomics versus race or gender or some of the other things that people associate with DEI. So I'm just saying that from a relationship perspective, that I think we could help just as many people or more focusing on socioeconomic status. But it sounds like you've broadened the category of what diversity means, and we really appreciate that. But I think that's the next step. How do we get to making it more about socioeconomic status, in my humble opinion?
Thank you.
Curator Graves, can I add a comment? And that is, our universities do a very good job with supporting Pell students, whether it's through the land grant scholarship program here at Mizzou, or the KC Scholars Program at UMKC. And through those programs and programs like the Center for Academic Success and Excellence, we do provide additional support. And that's why UMSO and UMKC are ranked so highly when it comes to social mobility, which is a new index that U.S. News and World Report measures. But even at Mizzou and at Missouri S&T, the percentage of Pell students has grown over the past decades, and the performance of students when it comes to six-year graduation rates have increased dramatically over those decades as well. So there's more work to do, but this is something that we take very seriously as a public university.
Yeah, this is
Okay,
Jeff Lehman.
Oh, go ahead,
Todd,
Jim.
or
Yeah, go
Chairman Graves, if you don't mind, I had a quick question. And Moon, I've noticed every so often I'll get contacted, and the last couple of times it seems to be, obviously by rural students, probably based on where I'm from. And occasionally it'll be where a student says, listen, in my class, there's no diversity of thought. It's kind of, and again, clearly we're talking about one or two professors, not a broad amount. But how do you handle that whenever, because it seems to me these are very similar items where a student is not allowed to really have their own opinion, and it's kind of my way or the highway by a professor. How do we handle that on these typical issues?
So let's take an example where a student in a class, like you mentioned, who may have conservative views and feels that he or she cannot speak up and share those views because if they did, they would feel sidelined or ostracized. Well, that's not a healthy environment to create. And in those cases, what we would do is to ask the department chair and the dean to meet with the faculty, discuss the concern from the student, and then determine what steps can be taken so that the class does become a more inclusive environment so that different individuals with different perspectives can share their thoughts, even though it may not be what the majority of the participants agree upon, but to have that as to continue the debate in the class, but do it in a civil manner. So that's what we would expect. That's what we would expect. Thank you.
Thank you, Moon.
Any other questions? All right, thank you, Dr. Gibson and the other participants. If there's no further discussion, Mr. Chairman, this concludes the business of the Academic Student Affairs Research and Economic Development Committee.
Okay, thank you, Curator Graves. Thank you, Dr. Gibson. Very informative. Curator Holloway, I now turn it over to you for the Audit, Compliance, and Ethics Committee meeting.
Thank you, Chairman Chapman. Today, the Audit, Compliance, and Ethics Committee has 3 informational items and 1 action item that we will tend to. The first is a report, our Audit, Compliance, and Ethics Quarterly Report from University of Missouri, and who will be presenting that is our Chief Audit Compliance Officer, Michelle Pirano. She will present this quarterly report to us at this time. And the full report is available in your materials, and we turn it over now to Michelle.
Thank you, Curator Holloway. And I want to address this morning 3 areas in this report with you. The status of our rolling audit plan, which was approved at the June 2021 Board of Curators meeting. The audit work performed since the September 2021 Board of Curators meeting. And then to go over the System Ethics and Compliance Program and the Code of Conduct Education. A brief thing about the Code of Conduct Education. Next slide, please. So currently on our rolling audit plan, we have 29 audits and consulting engagements. And since the September 2021 Audit, Compliance, and Ethics Committee meeting, we have completed 3 audits and 3 investigations. Currently, we have 5 internal audits in process, And we are also conducting the final review of management action plan implementation related to former audits. In addition, we have 3 consulting engagements, and monitoring of research grant expenses are in process. We are currently working 6 investigations at this time. Next slide, please. One of the audits that we completed in this past period was the organized healthcare arrangement at MU Health. An organized healthcare arrangement allows parties to share protected health information about patients. And this is one of the strategies for MU Healthcare, to engage and support community hospitals, and also as a way to ensure or help improve continuity of patient care, and to begin to get experience with improving health outcomes throughout the community. So they engaged in the purpose of the organized healthcare arrangement is to ensure compliance with the security rules and the privacy rules related in the HIPAA Portability and Accountability Act. So it's an arrangement between these organizations to ensure the security of the data. So our approach to this was to assess the governance structure and the policies that facilitate and support operations and communications and the decision-making and approvals among the partners. And then to review and assess the IT data security and safeguards that are in place to protect the data and the facilities information that's being shared among the partners. This review, the scope of our review was the Lake Regional Hospital Organized Healthcare Arrangement, which was put in place in June of 2019. There were no issues with the governance structure and how that is operating. We assessed our IT data security and safeguards for MU Health, since they are the leader of the OCA and the creator of the OCA, and should have an acceptable level of privacy and security practices in place. And the primary finding is that as our environment, it continues to increase in complexity and how we need to safeguard this data, MU Health just needs to keep evolving that to keep pace with the challenges of the expanded electronic medical records shared by the multiple entities. And MU Health has many initiatives underway to do that, and so they are integrating what's underway with the findings in our audit, and the leadership is ensuring that this will get done, and I have all confidence that they will be able to move forward with this strategy and protect the data. The next slide, please. The next audit I want to review is the lab safety audit at UMKC, and this is the 4th audit for lab safety across the 4 universities. So we've completed all of those audits. The purpose was to see if there's adequate controls in place to provide safe working conditions for faculty, students, and staff who work in the labs that house hazardous chemicals. So UMKC's efforts to secure labs are currently focused largely on the hazardous chemicals safety. So the audit is recommending a broader focus on general lab safety, including lab safety training, inspections, hazardous signage is needed. And in 2018, a peer review was performed at UMKC. And many of the observations in this audit mirrored what was observed at that time. So while some of the recommendations from the review have been implemented, many were found to have not been completed. So management is committed to completing the work already underway and to fully implement a lab safety program that includes the recommendations from this audit. An interesting observation across all 4 campuses is one of the biggest challenges is just keeping track of the labs and what the labs are being used for, so they know what safety measures need to be in place, and understanding when labs are taken offline so they could go in and clear out any hazardous chemicals. But all 4 campuses are committed to working on that. The next slide, please. So this part of the presentation is an update on implementation of our system-wide compliance program. The details of the progress that we've made compared to the fiscal year 2022 compliance plan is in your materials. And during this time, I just want to spend and share our approach of how we're establishing this oversight compliance function. One of the first things we need to do is to understand where in the organization compliance regulations apply. Who's doing that work? Who are the compliance professionals out there that are doing that work? So in a sense, we're building the inventory about who's doing the work, where and how well is it being done? What types of control activities do we have in place? And so what we're achieving this through gap analysis for major regulatory areas. We really want to understand the accountable areas, the workflow processes, the control activities, and the current level of effectiveness. Our overarching goal, besides improving compliance in the organization and reducing that risk within our risk appetite, and preventing and detecting any compliance issues, we also need to demonstrate that we have an effective compliance program. So you'll see as I go through this, what we're trying to do to put in place the building blocks to, within 3 to 5 years, show effectiveness of our compliance program. Next slide, please. So by focusing on building this inventory of where the regulatory regulations apply and who's doing the work, it's going to allow us to focus on the highest risk areas that need attention. It will help inform our educational and training needs. And as we build our educational and training needs, it's not just for overall compliance training for everyone, but it's how do we need to focus compliance training based on roles and responsibilities. And it's going to provide us the information needed to build the dashboard so we can not just track progress and collect the information, but in 3 to 5 years, be able to demonstrate the effectiveness of our programs so that when a regulator is in here, we will be able to provide the information to show for all of our 4 universities how we are complying with the 7 elements of an effective compliance program and the information specifically to certain regulations. And an important key part of this is building relationships with those compliance professionals who are critical to establishing another important feature, which is a regulatory change management process. We want to be able to communicate to those individuals impacted by any regulatory changes. Here's regulatory changes, here are the dates when they will go into effect, understand how they're going to approach that, be a resource to help them be able to meet those regulatory changes. That's another key part of an effective program, is that we know how to communicate back out and ensure that we're keeping compliant as regulations change. So while we continue to work on this, and our focus areas right now, we've done a lot of work in cybersecurity. We're doing work in data regulations, and you'll see some of that at the next committee meeting. And we're also focusing on research compliance. But while we're also doing this, we're establishing the system-wide committee to oversee this work. We're rolling out code of conduct awareness activities from now through September to build the awareness across our universities about our code of conduct and our obligations under the code of conduct. And we're also preparing the annual code of conduct training with an attestation that will be rolled out in the August-September timeframe when compliance training is rolled out. We also will be developing some fraud training and connecting this with our obligations for speaking up under the code of conduct and helping staff to understand how to identify concerns, fraud concerns, and where to report those and their obligation to speak up. Next slide, please. The Protection of Minors program was implemented in April of 2021. So this slide illustrates the number of youth programs held through December. The youth served, the supervising adults who worked the programs, and our program compliance to date. And these numbers reflect those youth programs that registered and may not reflect all the youth programs because we're continuing to build awareness about the policy and its requirements. And steps are also being taken to improve the compliance numbers for those programs that did register. So I will turn it back to Curator Holloway to see if there are any questions before I move into the final piece. Okay, if there are no questions, we'll move into the code of conduct training that was presented.
Actually, Michelle, can I jump in? I'm sorry, just was waiting for Curator Holloway. What information in the ethics and compliance program do you think will be new, or so I assume this is just pulling it all together, but for our employees as they go through this training?
As they go through the code of conduct training?
Correct.
I think what will be new, I think what will be helpful to them is it's a resource that helps them understand for specific areas, such as conflict of interest or gifts or different things they might encounter. They have a resource they can go to immediately to find out what is our policy around this and who can I contact if I have questions. I think what will be new is the attestation that we're asking them to read through that and to attest that they will abide by the code of conduct. And we're working on what form that attestation should take. So I would answer that as any compliance area or anything that they haven't formally really had to interact with in the role will be new to them. But what they normally interact with, if they do a lot of research, that won't be unfamiliar to them. It's really pulling the whole resource together so they see everything.
Okay,
Robin, thank you for that question. Are there any more questions for Michelle before we move on to the next report? Okay, now we're going to have her reporting on the system reporting, the hotlines annual report for 2020.
Before we move on to that, the next slide, we want to take just a moment. I appreciate that everyone took time to view the code of conduct training, and these topics are familiar. I know these topics are familiar with you, not only as a curator, but in your own work. And but raising awareness about this topic is an important part of demonstrating again that we have an ethics and compliance program. But I wanted to take a little time to see if anyone had any questions about anything that was in that training. Questions or comments?
I can just say that I viewed the video. I thought it was well done, and it's I guess the theme is our community, our commitment, and I think it's the idea is to raise everyone's awareness of the importance that each of us has a role in playing. All of our staff and all of our faculty, we all have a role in uplifting the university and doing what's right on a daily basis. So I want to thank everyone that's looked at the video, and let's keep going and uplifting our university the way we should.
Thank you, Curator.
Michelle, you ready to proceed to the next report?
Yes, it's an informational report in your packet about the University of Missouri system reporting hotlines and the types of calls and benchmarks compared to national, how we benchmark against national benchmarks. And so I would just ask if there are any questions about that as well.
If there are no other questions, I want to thank Michelle for her time here. And what we will proceed on to now is item 3. And this is our external auditors report from the University of Missouri. And Rachel Wiggins, who's a partner at BKD, will present the fiscal year external auditors report and required communication. She'll provide an overview of the NCAA agreed upon procedures report and an overview of the fiscal year 2022 audit scope services, engagement, timeline, and approach. Rachel?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that introduction. Happy to be here today. Yeah, I was like, there's a slideshow pulled up. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. But my goal here is to present the 2021 audit results, the results of the NCAA required agreed upon procedures, and then give an overview of the external audit scope as it relates to the upcoming 2022 fiscal year audit. Next slide. So our audit approach, we obviously have different sets of standards that we have to adhere to. Our audit is very much focused on the financial statements. And you can see there the various standards we have to adhere to from a financial reporting standpoint. We are ensuring that those financial statements are materially correct in accordance with U.S. generally accepted accounting principles, or GAAP, you'll sometimes hear referred to. From an auditing standpoint, we have to make sure that our audit is in accordance with generally accepted auditing standards as well as government auditing standards. And then from a compliance standpoint, these are the regulations that guide that process, and that is really all of your federal expenditures that is referring to. Next slide. So our audit does encompass an audit of the financial statements of the system as a whole, as well as Capital Region Medical Center, which is a component unit of the system. The objective of our audit is to express an opinion that those financial statements are materially correct in accordance with the accounting principles generally accepted in the United States. So the financial statements and disclosures are prepared by management, and then we come in and spend a lot of time auditing those, making sure, again, that they are in accordance with those standards before we can then express an opinion on them. Next slide. So during our planning process, we identify a number of areas that might be subject to higher risk, and then at the conclusion of the audit, circle around to let the board know if there's anything that came up during the course of the audit that we would need to report. And you can see there in all of those areas, there was nothing that was deemed reportable. Next slide. Another thing to point out is areas of the financial statements that do involve estimates. This is an area where we spend a considerable amount of time. We are making sure that we are comfortable with management's estimates in these areas, and that there's no indication of management bias. And those areas are listed here, but really third-party reimbursements, allowance for doubtful accounts. We want to make sure that receivables that are recorded in the financial statements are properly valued and collectible. The valuation of certain investment securities, obviously investments are a significant portion of the assets of the system, so making sure we're comfortable with that valuation. The certain accruals related to the various claims, and then of course the financial statement elements as they pertain to the defined benefit pension plan and the other post-employment benefit plan. There's a lot of assumptions that go into those actuarial assessments, and so we spend a lot of time making sure that we're comfortable with those assumptions that go into that. Next slide. When it comes to the compliance audit, there is a regimented computation that we have to go to determine each year what federal programs will be audited as a major program. And you can see there's some new ones, right, with all of the stimulus related funding that has occurred over the last couple of years. You have the HERF, as we call it, the Higher Education Relief Funds, the PRF. And so those are major programs that are being audited this year. Again, the objective of that portion of the audit is to express an opinion on compliance of those major programs based on the requirements that are put out by OMB. Next slide. Some other required communications. All of the significant accounting policies of the system are outlined and detailed in footnote 1 of the financial statements themselves. There was one new accounting standard that was adopted during fiscal year 21, and that was GASB 89, and relates to how interest on capital projects is recorded. Historically, interest was required to be capitalized as a part of the project, but going forward, that interest gets expensed basically in the year that it's incurred. No alternative accounting treatments. And then we just highlighted here some of the more significant financial statement disclosures that are in the report itself. So just to highlight there, and nothing to point out when it comes to, judgments regarding the quality of accounting policies. Next slide. So the other required communication is with respect to audit adjustments. There were no audit adjustments that were recorded as a part of the audit process this year. Generally, most years there are some proposed audit adjustments that are not recorded, and that is because they are deemed both by management as well as us to not have a material impact on the financial statements themselves. And so those are listed out for you there. Sometimes these, like one of these is a reclassification between assets and liabilities on how some patient refunds were accounted for. There's also a number of items that will come up every year, late items that come in, and those are evaluated whether, again, it's material enough to go back and restate the financial statements, or if we all can agree that they aren't going to have a material impact. So those are the items listed there. And again, everything was determined both by management, and we concurred not to have a material impact. Next slide. Again, this is the deliverables, the financial statements on Capital Region. There's also a report on debt compliance with respect to Capital Region. And then the NCAA agreed upon procedures, which I'll talk about here in a minute. And then we are still wrapping up the single audit report in accordance with uniform guidance. It is in really good shape, but that generally gets issued here in the next month or so. Next slide. These are the opinions. I've already mentioned these. I won't spend any time here, but these are the various opinions that do get issued in conjunction with the audit. Next slide. So I mentioned the NCAA agreed upon procedures. These are required every year for Division I institutions. So the Columbia and Kansas City campus go through this every year. Division II, it's required every 3 years, but fiscal year 21 was the third year. So this year we did perform those procedures for all 4 campuses. And there's nothing to report there, but just to let you know, those were all issued in advance of the deadline that those are required for. Next slide. All right, so that is fiscal year 21. Moving ahead to fiscal year 22, I'm going to talk about, again, what the audit is, the scope of the audit will encompass, the timeline, our approach, and then the team. Next slide. So you will see here listed the engagements that the audit will encompass. Same thing from a financial statement audit standpoint. Again, a single audit in accordance with the OMB guidance. But this year we will only do the NCAA required procedures for Columbia and Kansas City. Next slide. This is what we're looking at from an audit timeline standpoint. We will have a pre-audit planning meeting this spring. We'll begin our interim procedures, some of our risk assessment, internal control procedures later this spring as well in May. We will do detailed student financial aid testing this year, and that will take place in July, right after the end of the fiscal year is when the bulk of that happens. And then we begin our final fieldwork procedures, generally the end of August, with the goal of issuing the final financial statements in October. And then once that, we do some of the federal program testing throughout, but then that does get wrapped up right after the release of the financial statement audit. And then the NCAA procedures, those happen at the end of the year. Next slide. Again, here is the framework. It's same set of standards for 22 that we had in 21, so no changes there. Next slide. So as we go through our risk assessment procedures, there's a number of things that we do to gather information as to our ongoing understanding of the business environment. So we interview a number of members of management from across the system. We review board minutes, really trying to get an understanding of anything that has changed that we need to be aware of, any areas that we need to focus on. If there's any unusual transactions that occurred, things of that nature, and really trying to identify those areas of the financial statements that might be more susceptible to a material misstatement. We do look at internal controls as they relate to financial reporting. We'll perform a walkthrough of those tests and controls and look at duties assignments as well within the control structure. Next slide. These are some of the areas that, again, we have not completed our risk assessment procedures, so there may be additional areas that are identified, but these are definitely areas that, we have preliminary assessed risk at. And with respect to the financial statements, the valuation of investments, again, that will always be a risk factor just due to the volume and the variety of investments that the system is invested in. Revenue recognition, that is a risk in, does not really matter the type of entity, but the revenue is properly recognized in the right period with the right restrictions. So we spend a lot of time there. Again, the valuation of any receivables, making sure that we're comfortable with that valuation. Presentation of net position, that things are recorded in the right bucket with the right restrictions or lack thereof. And then with respect to this year, leases is definitely going to be a higher risk area. I think I'll talk about on a later slide. There is a new accounting standard that goes into effect for fiscal year 22 related to leases. And then obviously just general risk management and compliance. Next slide. As I mentioned, leases, that's the big one that you may have heard about. There is a GASB lease standard. There's also a FASB lease standard on the private side. So this has gotten a lot of talk in the accounting arena across the board. But basically, most leases now become a balance sheet item. So there is an asset and a related liability with respect to virtually all leases. So the system group is spending a lot of time getting prepared for this. We've had lots of discussions and we'll continue to have those to make sure that we're on the same page and have a seamless adoption of this standard, but it is definitely a big one. The second one listed there, I don't anticipate really having much impact, but definitely wanted to highlight GASB 87 as it's a significant from a time standpoint, and it will result in some new line items on the financial statements themselves. Next slide. This is just a list of our team members. We have a lot of continuity on the team. Also, I have also on the call, not presenting, but Fred Helfrich is my counterpart, the partner on the healthcare side, and then Michael Flaxbeard, who helps me on the system side, are both on the call as well. But we're able to bring both the higher ed as well as the healthcare expertise to the team, which is really beneficial. From a just to address all of the various components of the financial statements. Next slide. That is all I had. So again, thank you. I know we'll be talking probably later this afternoon in closed session, but I will at this time open it up to any questions.
Any questions for Rachel?
Yes, Rachel, Curator Holbrook. How many years have you guys been doing the audits?
So we rebid the audit last year. We had done it 5 years before that. So this was our 6th year.
And on the rebid, is that for a 1-year extension or is it a 5-year deal?
It's 5 years.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Rachel, well, thank you for this portion of your report. We appreciate your time, and we will be talking with you later, an executive. And now the committee goes on to an action item that we have. That's the engagement of independent auditors and related fees for University of Missouri System. And we will ask Executive Vice President Ryan Rapp to discuss this engagement as BKD for these independent auditors for our fiscal year 2021. Ryan?
Thank you, Curator Holloway. I do just want to clarify, while it was for 5 years, the board appoints and approves each individual year. So that is what we have before you today. And we did take this out to bid last year. We saw, as a result of going out to bid, there was an 11% decrease in fees and expenses. At the time, it was agreed that there would be an inflationary adjustment each year. What you have before you today is we're seeking approval to engage BKD for the June 30th, 2022 financial statement audit, and it would also include the OMB uniform guidance audit, the financial statements for CAP region as well. The total fees would be and expenses would be not to exceed $638,557. I'm happy to answer any questions members of the committee might have.
Ryan, Jeff Lehman, just to be clear, we did a 5-year bid, but each year we approve it.
Correct.
Correct. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you for that, Ryan. If there are no further discussion on this, may I have a motion from the committee to approve the Executive Vice President for Finance and Operations be authorized to employ the firm BKD LLP to provide audit services for the University of Missouri for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2022, the fees being $638,557.
So moved.
I hear a second.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed signifying by saying nay. Are there any abstentions? Being none, the vote is unanimous. I would like to refer this matter then from the committee to the board chair, Chairman Chapman, for this is our recommendation.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Curator Holloway. We have a motion on the floor. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay. Marcy, you're pretty fast, as always. All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed say nay. Do we have any abstentions? Okay, hearing none, the motion carries. Okay, Curator Holloway, back to you.
Okay, so thank you for that, Chairman. And now we'd like to move on to, we need a resolution for an executive session. The Audit Compliance and Ethics Committee will need to hold an executive session later today. May I have a motion and a second from the committee to conduct a closed session?
So moved. Second.
I think we have a double a motion and a double second. And Cindy, can you call the roll for this, please?
Yes. Curator Burnsick?
Yes.
Curator Graham?
Yes.
Curator Holloway?
Yes.
Curator Lehman?
Yes.
All right. You have all committee votes in favor.
All unanimous. Okay. Well, thank you everyone for your time on this. Mr. Chairman, this concludes our business for the public session of the Audit Committee, and we will reconvene in a closed session later this afternoon. And thank everyone for their time.
Okay, thank you, Keith. Thank you for a good morning of discussion. We will now take a lunch break. Is everyone comfortable with a 20-minute lunch breaks? We can be back at noon. We were going to potentially schedule it for 30, but is 20 sufficient? We can come back at noon and stay on time. Okay, well, let's come back at noon, take a 20-minute break for lunch, and see you at noon. Okay, thank you, everyone.